Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. This week on the show, it is a momentous episode, Jonathan, because we are starting our third season. We have done our Full Metal Alchemist, we have done our UFO Table Moonworks, and we're on our third season. And for the third season, what better to talk about than the third Lupin? That is right. We are talking about Lupin the Third this season on the show, the Classic Adventures of Lupin the Third, where we're going to be looking through a selection of the different anime series, OVAs, and movies featuring Lupin the Third, mostly the kind of 20th century stuff. We're not going to get into any of the real modern stuff. Obviously, we'll be starting with Lupin the Third, also known as Lupin the Third Part 1, also known as Lupin the Third, The Green Jacket Adventures, the original 23-episode show from 1971 on this episode. And this is a really exciting topic because this is one where, Jonathan, you know a lot more about Lupin the Third than I do, because I had not seen anything until I sat down to watch Lupin the Third Episode 1 a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, this is going to be such a fun season. I am by no means like a Lupin expert, but I have seen a good little amount here and there over the years, and I've done some writing on it, and I've always wanted to do a deep dive, particularly into the 20th century stuff. So this season we are going from 1971, the original show, up through 2002 with one of the specials, and so we're kind of focusing in on sort of that broad period of time. This is going to be a 7-episode season where we are going to do at least pieces of all the major anime. When we get to part 2, that show is 155 episodes, so we are not doing all 155 episodes, but we'll tell you about that as we get there. But we're going to do all of the movies, several of the specials, because Lupin kind of transitioned into an annual special at one point kind of show, and we'll talk about that. And yeah, this is exciting, Sean, and I'm also just excited to hear your thoughts, because there can't be many people alive today whose experience with Lupin starts in 71 and goes chronologically through. You're doing it like OG from the beginning. I think most people have like jumped around because it's been around for so ludicrously long at this point, almost through the entire history of anime, because this is close to as early as you can get. The pilot film was 1969, so this is like the decade anime fucking starts, you know?
Yeah, it is crazy, because I think for particularly in the West, although I think this is also true of a lot of people in Japan as well, they get started with Castle of Cagliostro, which is the Ghibli Miyazaki film, right? And that is one of the Miyazaki movies I have not watched. And so this really is, obviously, like, I knew about Lupin. I knew the main characters. I knew the premise. Like, I wasn't completely ignorant of what Lupin the Third was. But I just had never taken the plunge and had been waiting for an opportunity to do it. Had bought the Lupin the Third Part 1 Blu-ray by Discotek when that came out a couple years ago. And just like knowing I wanted to watch it, but not knowing when. And then we started doing Japanimation Station, and then you wanted to do this topic, and it's like a perfect time. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating, because as you say, there was like anime airing when Lupin the Third came out that was still in fucking black and white. Like, that's how old this is. And it's by far the oldest anime we've talked about. I mean, it's 8 years before the original Mobile Suit Gundam, which I think is the other oldest thing we have covered. And it's a pretty amazing show, and it's a really fascinating show to watch. It's kind of like unbelievable that it exists. And thinking about it in the context of 1971 is kind of mind-blowing, because there was really nothing else out there at the time, which I think is probably one of the reasons why it took a while for it to fully catch on. But it is a crazy experience. I'm really excited to go and follow this journey and see like where the different versions of Lupin go from here.
Yeah, and of course, Lupin, I think, is a more niche anime in the United States, which is why, like, Discotek does all of it. And Discotek is wonderful, but they are one of the more niche, like, independent labels out here. And I love them for all the work they do, because it's incredible. And the part 1 set that we are working from is a testament to that, because it's an amazing release. But in Japan, obviously, this is as popular as anime gets. Lupin the Third is like, every man, woman, and child in Japan knows Lupin the Third. Like, that is just, it's like The Simpsons or something. Everybody knows it. It's been on forever. Much longer than The Simpsons, actually, multiple casts, so many artists, and literally extending across, basically the whole of anime history. And it's such, that makes it such a cool thing to look at.
Yeah, no, yeah. And like, to really emphasize that point for people, it is like a massive cultural touchstone in Japan. Like, I watched a while ago, they did this big kind of poll thing for like who are the best, the greatest, and the most popular voice actors in the history of Japan, in like anime. And in the top 10, I think about half of them were Lupin actors. It was like Lupin actors. It was like Doraemon. It was like that kind of stuff, because those are the things that, while they're not particularly like popular over here in America, they are like the cultural touchstones and the thing that, like, when people, if you're Japan, think of anime, you're going to think of something like Lupin the Third, or Doraemon, or Sazai-san, or, Crayon Shinchan, that kind of stuff. And it's in that kind of like, what they would use the word kokumin teki of, just like, it's like the national anime kind of. And so that's one of the reasons why I've always wanted to watch it. And it is insanely popular. One thing I saw when I was looking up some stuff on this, on the Japanese Wikipedia page for Lupin the Third Part 1, they point out that there was a kind of a research thing done by this group called Video Research in Japan for what were like the highest rated anime broadcasts ever in the history of Japan. And number 6 is a rerun of the final episode of Lupin the Third Part 1, which aired in 1978, which had a percentage of 32.5, which is the 6th highest percentage of any anime broadcast ever. So that is how popular this is. A rerun of the last episode of Lupin the Third Part 1 that aired while Lupin the Third Part 2 was also airing.
Yeah, and that's crazy. Obviously, Lupin the Third kind of took the Mobile Suit Gundam route to popularity on TV, where its first show did fine, but like didn't light the world on fire until reruns and stuff. And then, of course, it became a forever property a couple years later with Part 2. But yeah, we will cover all of that. And, I just really encourage anyone who's maybe listening to this who is in like Sean's position, who hasn't seen any of it before, this is the time to do it. We are going to guide you through in kind of a Lupin 101 fashion, and it should be fun. And again, we're not... we've selected episodes from like the 155 episode show, so don't feel like you're going to have to do a crazy amount of anime homework this time. This is going to be a very fun season, though, and I'm excited to dig in. So should we just start, Sean, at the beginning and tell the people where this all comes from?
Yeah, and since this is a topic, Jonathan, that you know a lot more about than me, you are the one who's in charge of the history lesson on Lupin. So that's great for me, because it makes it a little bit easier for me. So go ahead, take it away.
And this is also just an area of anime history I've done research on, and like it's so part of the thing about the Part 1 series from 71 is that like every single name on it is someone significant in anime history. It has to be like one of the anime with the biggest cross section of important people working on it, like this, Astro Boy, Gundam 79. There's just a couple of those that you look at, and like the names you go down the list is just like, this is crazy. Lupin definitely has that, and this is an area I've studied. But let's start with where this actually comes from, which is Lupin, like most anime, is originally a manga. Lupin the Third is a manga written by Monkey Punch. Monkey Punch is the pen name of Kazuhiko Kato, born in 1937. He is age 30 at the time that the manga debuts. in a magazine called Weekly Manga Action in August 1967. That magazine was brand new. It had only started the previous month in July. It's a seinen magazine, so I think we all know shonen. This is like, the age group up from that. So like young adults, that kind of thing, or teenage boys. They
don't tell you how to pronounce the kanji is the big difference in my experience. If you want to know the difference between shonen manga and seinen manga, they don't write how you pronounce the kanji in there, so it's a lot harder.
That's rough, yeah. They are expecting you are like in high school and know all the kanji, right? So,
yes, you are expecting. Yeah, seinen literally means adult, so it's like they're expecting you to be an adult, so you don't need the help. But it's like, I'm an adult, but I also am not an expert in Japanese, so it's like I could use the help, and it would be great.
Yeah. Just for reference, this is also the magazine where Lone Wolfen Cub runs in the 70s. Just to say a manga that I think people probably know to give a sense of what is here. Jarinko Chie the Brat, which is another manga Isao Takahata will later adapt into anime. It's a big magazine. It no longer is weekly. It is now just called Manga Action because it runs twice a month. But it is still around now. So Monkey Punch, he lived from 1937 to 2019, so he only recently passed away. He died at the age of 81, and he died just months before the release of Lupin III, the First, the CGI Lupin movie that we will not be talking about this season, but if we ever do a modern Lupin season to kind of follow up on this, I love that movie, and he really fought for that movie to be made because he always wanted to see Lupin in CGI. He thought it would be cool, and it is cool, so that's just a piece of history there. He's someone who drew from a young age, scribbled and doodled and did that kind of thing. He started drawing comic strips for the school paper in high school. He said it got to the level where he was basically doing it as a part-time job, but never assumed he would make it a career, and actually went to a technical school for electronics in Tokyo. And that was kind of his intended career path. But he started working in a doujinshi group with other artists, eventually started drawing Yonkoma, which is 4-panel gag manga, which I think you definitely see like the influence of that on Lupin III. He was an assistant to a very famous early manga artist named Naoko Tsuji on Zero Sen Hayato and a one we've probably all heard of, Tiger Mask, which is a very famous series. Tiger Mask, basically, it ran concurrent with Lupin later on, but for that first year or so, he was working as an assistant. You might be wondering, why does he have the name Monkey Punch? He did not choose that, and he never liked it. He didn't come up with it. So he was contracted by the magazine to draw Lupin for 3 months, and the editor chose the name. Monkey Punch later said, "I really don't know how he came up with it, but I couldn't really refuse him or disagree with him, so it just kind of stuck, and I've been stuck with it now for 36 years. Actually, my editor told me, just keep the name for a year, keep writing for a year, and then we'll figure things out." So I was like, okay. So I wrote for a year, but then Lupin became popular, and I couldn't give up the name, so now it's stuck for 36 years. As I mentioned earlier, Lupin was originally supposed to be a 3-month project. Had Lupin not become successful, I'm sure that after less than a year, that name would have disappeared. So that is hilarious to me. He did not choose that name, and he was stuck with it because his first big manga became a hit. As happens.
It reminds me of like in the 80s in like Japanese video game development, where a lot of Japanese game developers used pseudonyms in the credits so that they wouldn't get poached by other companies and stuff. And it's like, what if those pseudonyms had stuck around? It's like you got stuck with it forever. And so you're like, Saki-chan's papa was just what you were known as for the rest of your life because that's what you were credited as in like Mega Man or something.
Yes. So Lupin in the magazine is a big hit. It really, and I think you have to think about the moment of the 60s. This taps into a countercultural vibe. It takes a lot of global inspirations, both from Japan and from the world. It is definitely in that moment of like Japanese new wave cinema, Seijun Suzuki films like Tokyo Drifter, obvious, and like the kind of Nikatsu noir that is getting big at the time. All of that is there in Lupin III. Seijun Suzuki we will come back to because he works on the show and the movies at one point. When he is banned from the live-action film industry because they get mad at him. That's a whole other story. But then also I think the global popularity of stuff like James Bond, which was also big in Japan, is very obvious. Mission Impossible starts in 1966, the TV series, and hey, Lupin is constantly putting on masks and ripping them off, and that's even more in the magazine than in the show, I think. And it's all there in the manga. The manga is generally more explicit, violent, and sexual than the animated adaptations. But I think sometimes people hear that and they think that means it's darker. I don't know if I would say that. It is in a lot of ways more irreverent and fourth wall breaking than the various adaptations. Mad Magazine was also a really big influence on Monkey Punch. And so like all of that is in there. And I think sometimes it gets oversimplified to say that like the early episodes of part 1 are more like the manga. And in some ways they are, and in some ways they aren't. I think the early episodes of this first anime don't quite have the same sense of like fourth wall breaking irreverence, but they do have some of that other material. Monkey Punch also said on other inspirations, I would probably have to say as far as inspirations, maybe some of the more famous mystery works, just worldly mystery works. I think they probably helped me out creating my stories quite a bit. Even things like, Treasure Island or Count of Monte Cristo. I think even those works influenced me quite a bit. I even enjoyed reading about D'Artagnan from The Three Musketeers. It might be my own analysis, but I even feel that Lupin might be very similar to D'Artagnan. Milady, the character that comes from those stories, I think that person might be similar to Fujiko Mine from the stories. So those kinds of works, I think they really did affect me at an early age. So Lupin is an instant hit. It runs from 1967 to 1969 in 14 tankobon volumes, just to give you a sense of the length of the original manga. And I should also say this is a non-serialized manga. I think most people today are familiar with manga that tell a story. Lupin is a different story every week, much like the various anime adaptations. There is no real continuity between them. There is a second run called Shin Lupin III, or New Lupin III, that runs from 1977 to 1981 alongside the Part 2 anime, and that is a little longer. That's collected into 21 tankobon. Of the series' appeal, Monkey Punch said, I guess you could say that part of the appeal is that my works have been directed at the youth of the nation and of the world, the younger generation, so in a sense, I wasn't ever really restricted with political barriers. It was easy for me to continue writing and drawing in that sense because it was freedom. Like when Lupin goes abroad, overseas, you never really see him have a passport. There are no boundaries for him. He's a free roamer. I kind of project my desires, my interests through Lupin. He's a thief and a criminal in that regard, but I'm using that more as of a setting. What I really like about Lupin is his freedom, his boundless freedom that allows him to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and never really be tied down to anything or anyone in particular. I think I want that for myself in my own work when I do my job, so for that reason, Lupin is by far the character I most relate to. One other note about Lupin III is that the third part is that obviously this is pulling from an outside sort of story and mythology. At the time that this manga was created, Japan was not enforcing international trade copyrights, so Monkey Punch took Maurice Leblanc's Arsène Lupin. That is where this comes from. It's a French series of detective story, or not detective stories, but like caper stories. Yeah, and so Arsène Lupin is that character. The whole gimmick with Lupin III is that he is the grandson of Arsène Lupin, so he's in this lineage of great thieves. And Monkey Punch does this with several of the characters. Zenigata is like Zenigata the 7th. Ishikawa Goemon is Ishikawa Goemon the 13th. He likes playing with this. So the stories were technically under copyright when Monkey Punch started doing Lupin III. It did fall into the public domain by Japanese law before any lawsuits were filed, but in North America and Europe, French copyright was still being enforced, so a lot of early localizations of Lupin III, some of which you can still kind of like find online, there's some early DVDs, will rename the character Lupin, just use the like transliteration of the katakana, or call him Wolf. In France, where obviously the copyright was most enforced, the series was known as Edgar, Detective Burglar, with Lupin himself renamed Edgar de la Cambriole, Edgar of Burglary, which is a great name. In 2012, Leblanc's original stories did enter the public domain in France, where the rule is 70 years after the death, and Leblanc died in 1941. And so it is in the public domain for any country now, so it is not a problem, but that is a funny note, that this is, like, at the time that, Monkey Punch was writing this, Leblanc hadn't even been dead 20 years, so this was pretty recent stuff.
But to be fair, a pretty famous part of LeBlanc's Lupin stories is that he wanted to use Sherlock Holmes as a character, and he couldn't because this is all basically contemporary Sherlock Holmes as those original Lupin stories, and so he has a character, something called Herlock Sholmes. In order to get around it. It's like Herlock Sholmes in Wilson, which is funny because they also use Wilson in Dr. House to get around their fake Watson character. So it's like, hey, what goes around comes around, motherfucker. Hey, you want to take Herlock Sholmes? We've got Lupin the Third. There you go.
Yep. And Sherlock Holmes is also in Lupin the Third at various points later on. I don't know if in anything we're watching this season, although the most recent anime that aired, Part 6, did a whole Sherlock Holmes arc where Watson is murdered and Sherlock and Lupin try to solve it together, which I think is... I have not seen that anime yet. I just thought that was a great premise for a Lupin anime. So that's the manga. Have you read any of the manga, Sean?
I read a couple of chapters. I didn't have time to get very far into it. I mean, my main impressions are like, as you said, it is like very irreverent. The Mad Magazine influence is really apparent. I think both in terms of content and especially the art, which he was like really heavily influenced by. And yeah, it is like adult in the content, but it is not like dark. It technically is, it is dealing with like more kind of adult subject matter in the sexual sense in a way that you would not really see anything like that be made today. But in terms of the late 60s and early 70s, you saw more adult content like that. It's like, if you've ever seen like an old Playboy or Mad Magazine and that kind of stuff, like it has that kind of tone. And I think that that's pretty interesting. The art is obviously fantastic. I did also, the version I've been reading from, I found some scans of the Japanese Isoban, or basically collector's edition, which are kind of fucking crazy because it's in 3 volumes of the original run, which those volumes are like, it's like 900 pages per volume because it's like 30 something chapters. It's kind of ridiculous. But he does write a foreword in the first one, which goes over some of the stuff that you talked about with like him not being able to pick his name. But he also has a spiel on Lupin the Third that I thought was pretty interesting, where he describes it as like a story that has no nationality, basically, like it, which is something that's interesting because the anime, at least the one we've watched, is very definitively set in Japan. But like the way he describes it is like it's about the world. It's about kind of, there's no national borders. You kind of ignore those things, and kind of like that him using Lupin the Third is part of that kind of element as well. That it is about breaking that down. And he specifically says like it's a anti-patriotic manga, not in the sense that it's like against patriotism, but it's like where that doesn't exist. And he using the word Aikokushin in Japanese, which literally means like the heart that loves the country, is the kanji there. And then he has this whole thing where he like takes that and he does a play on that word where he says it's not a manga about patriotism or like loving the country. It's a manga about loving the universe. It's a manga about loving the earth. And it's a manga about loving freedom. And it's a manga about being able to fly around the world freely without a passport, without a visa, with none of that stuff being necessary. And I thought that was like a very interesting way he phrased it.
And that is, part 1 of the anime is an outlier in being Japan-bound. Everything after this point will go all over the world. Zenigata gets promoted from the Japanese police to working for the ICPO in all the other versions, so he is a globe-trotting detective after one thief, instead of just a French detective, which I do like that, or just a Japanese detective, which I do kind of like the part 1 version, where he is just kind of this lowly Japanese detective with like this small area that he's going after Lupin, but we'll talk about that later. I love Zenigata. Yeah, I've read a little bit more of the manga, kind of a piecemeal. There is a really great collection that came out via 7 Seas in the US last year called Lupin the Third Greatest Heists. You can get this in hardcover. It's a very nice hardcover that's not that expensive, or on Kindle and on all of those services. And it is a new translation. This was a collection that was put together in Japan by Monkey Punch's editors when he died. There's a second volume of that as well that is coming out this July in the United States. So that's a good cross-section because they collected stories from the 2 different manga, and kind of just to show you like, here's a really good Fujiko chapter, here's a great Zenigata chapter, here's the original Goemon chapter, which is actually adapted in part 1. So all of that stuff, and it's cool to see. So if you want to find it, Tokyo Pop back in the day in the 2000s did do a full run of the original Lupin the Third, and they got about halfway through New Lupin the Third before it got canceled. Those are super duper out of print and impossible to find unless you want to spend hundreds of dollars on eBay, but people have scanned them and you can go torrent those if you want some official translations. But there you go. That's the manga. Not really our focus here, but it is, as you say, I love the art. It's very sketchy. It really reminds me more of like an American like newspaper strip comic more than like a modern manga. In fact, I would say Monkey Punch's art style reminds me a lot of Bill Watterson on Calvin and Hobbes. It's got a very similar kind of sketchy feel to it, but it is very fun. It is not the kind of thing you're probably used to with modern manga, but it is a cool series to look at.
Yeah, definitely. All
right. So continuing on our history lesson, there's a lot here, and I'm gonna back up to the beginning of anime, Sean. It is because we kind of have to for this. There's just no other way. It's often stated that anime begins in 1963 with Osamu Tezuka and Mighty Atom, the show we know as Astro Boy. That is an oversimplification. Animation does exist, obviously, in Japan from early cinema, although there isn't really like a sort of concerted commercial effort in the way you have in the West with like Disney and Warner Brothers and stuff. There's really two major post-war developments that create anime as we know it today. One of those is Mighty Atom, which is the TV innovation, but the other is Toei Animation, which is the first concerted studio effort to have an ongoing feature animation division in Japan. It started in 1946 as Nihon Doga Eiga, or Japan Animated Films, founded by Kenzo Masaoka, who is one of the earliest Japanese animators. He did a lot of pre-war work as well, a lot of independent work within studios, bounced around a lot. And he started this company, which in 1956 was bought by Toei, renamed Toei Doga, and they then made a string of animated feature films, starting with Hakujaden in 1958, which is sort of the first big color feature Japanese animated film. Really amazing a piece if you've never seen it. And they continued roughly one or two a year at that point. And I say all of this because this is where a lot of the major animators and filmmakers who would work on Lupin started at Toei together. So people like Osamu Dezaki, who works on Lupin and does a bajillion other things. He was famous for stuff like Tomorrow's Joe, all the way, one of the most famous names. The recently deceased Leiji Matsumoto, Yoichi Kotabe, Yasuo Otsuka, and then, of course, big names like Isao Takahata and Hayao Miyazaki. Toei got into a lot of labor disputes in the 1960s, as did a lot of Japanese companies. This is the era of sort of Japanese counterculture and the new wave and pretty violent union busting. And Takahata and Miyazaki famously became leaders in the Toei Animation Union. This all spills out into the delightful communist fable Horus, Prince of the Sun, which is their 1968 film that I think is a masterpiece. And after that point, they left there was a lot of brain drain from Toei at that time, in part because of these disputes, in part because Toei stopped making sort of the big movies, wound up going into kind of cheaper TV works. And this is important for Lupin because a lot of these people go to a company called Tokyo Movie Shinsha, which is what makes Lupin III. This will include Dezaki, Otsuka, Takahata, Miyazaki, and others. So, the company that makes Lupin is Tokyo Movie Shinsha. It will later be named TMS Entertainment. That's the studio that animates Lupin. They began in 1946 as a textile manufacturing company and opened the movie arm in 1964, intending to get into animation.
That's like when you learned that Nintendo started as a card company in the 19th century. You're like, what the fuck? Okay.
I know. I love it. So Lupin, again, was an immediate success in the magazine as a manga, and during that run, this company became interested in adapting it, but they didn't have the resources to launch a full-scale project. So they took what is a really unusual step of creating a 12-minute pilot film to secure outside funding and interest. There are two versions of the pilot film you can see today. We watched both of these. The first one, they were envisioning doing Lupin as a movie, not a TV show. So the first version of the pilot is animated in CinemaScope widescreen. It's very stunning. Actually, most of Toei Animation's films were also done like this because if you don't know, the Japanese film industry was very vertically integrated. The studios owned the theaters and all that, and the studios had literal investments in widescreen tech. And so if you want to know why Japanese artists did the best work with widescreen in the history of cinema, it's because they all had to. So they all had to shoot and make stuff in widescreen. And so you had this brief sort of moment in the 60s where all this commercial film animation was done in big, stunning CinemaScope, which we don't really get back to until sort of now, like the 2010s. Now we're starting to get, and the 2020s, we're getting some movies made that way again. But for a long time, anime went back to like 4:3 and 16:9. But anyway, so this first version of the pilot is, like I said, in CinemaScope. We'll talk about its content in a minute. One of the names I want to shout out right away, because we're going to talk about him a lot this season, in terms of, Tokyo Movie is one of those studios that's kind of a haven for the fleeing Toei animators. One of those is Yasuo Otsuka. He's a big name to know for Lupin and animation of the period in general. He's someone who's widely regarded, especially within the industry, as one of the greatest animators in anime history. He was never a director, but he was a superb hands-on animator. He worked with Miyazaki and Takahata on Lupin and a lot of their other pre-Ghibli projects, and later even did like workshops with Ghibli animators to like teach them the tools of the trade. So very respected. He has a book called Sakuga Asama Mire, or Drawing Sweaty, which is considered one of the seminal texts by an anime artist, and Studio Ghibli has actually kept that book in print, along with producing a 2004 documentary on him called Yasuo Otsuka, Joy in Motion. And he is one of the main artists on the pilot film, and was really enthusiastic for it because he loved drawing guns and cars, and was a genius at sort of exaggerated motion and action, all of which becomes staples of Lupin going forward. The guns and cars are not super detailed in Monkey Punch's manga. They are ludicrously detailed in the TV show because Yasuo Otsuka was a freak about this stuff. And so you can literally see like every gun in the world is in part one. The supervisor of this pilot film, though, and the person who would become the first director of the anime is Masaaki Osumi. He started out working in puppet theater in Kobe, which led to his hiring at Tokyo Movie. He is not one of the Toei people. But the pilot film itself, which we should talk about here, Sean, because we both watched it, it's essentially a pitch reel or an introduction for the story, and it walks you through the 5 main characters of the story. Lupin himself, Daisuke Jigen, Ishikawa Goemon, Fujiko Mine, and what are they calling? Zenigata, but he has a different first name at this point. They're calling him, I think, Heisuke Zenigata after he eventually gets given the first name Koichi in later versions. That's why it threw me off for a second there.
He's just Zenigata no Tochan to me.
I know.
I don't know any fucking given name.
He's not Tochan yet, because that's an invention of the anime. Anyway, this version, though, is unsuccessful in getting funding for a film project, so they then animated a second pilot for TV distribution. This was reanimated in 4:3 with simpler animation, but it's the same writing, same basic storyboards. The pilot itself is not seen publicly until it is broadcast on TV in 1988, and both versions are released on VHS in 1995 as Lupin III Secret Files. But a lot of the imagery of this pilot will be super familiar, I think, even if you've never seen Lupin, because a lot of these shots are directly reused or reanimated for theme songs in this first anime, and then just kind of used in anime culture in general. I know you said this to me, Sean, that there's that shot in the pilot film of Lupin running from the police, and there's all these like lights in the background, and that is like the shot whenever someone shows off Lupin III, that's the image that they use.
Yes, yeah, like when I was talking about that voice actor poll or whatever in like the 100 best voice actors in the history of anime that they did in Japan, that is like it's necessary B-roll for Lupin. You have that shot of him running diagonally towards the camera with the spotlights behind him and the gunshots hitting behind him, which is used in the original pilot footage, and you have like a lot of shots like that. You have the one with him with Jigen like rolling the revolver barrel and stuff like that. You've got, I think for me, the most striking sequence in it is when you have Fujiko is like dancing, and this is the most like Seijun Shizuki looking part of the whole fucking thing, and there's like these flashing like live action images, like look like pictures from like magazines and stuff of real people. Some of it has like actual like human nudity in it, and she's like dancing at a club. It's very striking and interesting imagery that I think just really kind of puts you in that late 60s, early 70s time period in Japanese like filmmaking, because that's what it feels like. It feels like it's very much pulling from that style. And if you've seen movies or some other live action TV stuff from Japan from that period, is very much in that style, and it's really cool to see.
Yeah, the pilot, like if you go watch it, it's not like you're getting a story really, but as a like stylistic statement of intent for what they want to do with Lupin, it's really cool. And especially the widescreen version is just stupendously animated.
Yeah.
And my favorite shot is the one of Jigen rolling the barrel of his revolver across his sleeve and then firing, which is one of my favorite shots of all time, because Jigen is a fucking badass, and that's great. But it's a fun sort of piece. And what's cool is that we're going to talk about it more in part one, because basically they use every part of the buffalo. At some point, every shot of this pilot is reused somewhere in the anime, whether it is like literal footage taken for the theme songs, or footage they reanimate for the theme songs, or whole sequences that they just reuse for, like Lupin's escape at the end of the pilot is reused in one of the sort of middle period episodes. It's cool, but it's definitely an essential part of the kind of part one experience.
Yeah. One other note about it that I found very amusing is like, it felt like they weren't sure, either they weren't sure or this is just like a stylistic choice, but with like Fujiko's face is basically unanimated, which is very weird, right? She has this like that kind of Bond girl, very like 60s kind of, like femme fatale look, but they don't move anything about her facial expression. So it's just like static and kind of like perfect. And it is something that like they soften that approach a lot more once they get into the actual show, and then Fujiko kind of becomes a different character once you get to the kind of the Ghibli take on the series in the second half. But it is like very extreme the way that they keep her like kind of stone face locked in that pilot film, and I thought that was very funny.
It is Fujiko's design they never figure out in the part one universe. Like, it is really rough in the early episodes. Miyazaki clearly redesigned her for the second half because she looks like a Miyazaki heroine in the second half of the series, but she doesn't really look like Fujiko anymore. It would really be later anime that I think would nail down what she looks like. Although even then, this is, when we eventually talk about the show, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, that's made in 2012, that show is very much conscious about the fact that Fujiko kind of was a character with no visual essence, and the show kind of plays with that idea, but we'll get to that another day. But yes, one other note to make here about the pilot film is the casting, because it's kind of interesting how we come around to having the classic Lupin cast. The first pilot film, the CinemaScope one, has a couple of people who would stick around, though not always in their original parts. The only actor who is there from day one to the end is Kiyoshi Kobayashi. He is Jigen in the first cast, the second cast, and then all of the anime casts, other than a movie we're going to talk about later on, The Fuma Conspiracy, which completely replaces the cast. The thing about Kiyoshi Kobayashi, and I think something that makes Jigen just a particular fan favorite, is that he was around forever. He stuck around from that first pilot in 1969 until a episode 0 prologue to Lupin Part 6 in 2021, where he handed the role off to Akio Otsuka. Just to give you an idea of like, who can replace this guy? We better get Akio Otsuka. There is no one else who can like take these fucking shoes. So he voiced Jigen for a full 52 years. And then he did pass away in 2022 at, I think, like the ripe old age of 90. So that is pretty cool. And we will talk about him more later. Other than that, though, the first cast had Nachi Nozawa as Lupin. He never did it again. Eiko Masuyama as Fujiko. She was also Fujiko in the second pilot film. She is not Fujiko in part one, the anime. She's voiced by an actress named Yukiko Nikaido. This is one of the only things she ever did. Masuyama would come back, though, for part two and all future versions of Fujiko until 2011. As Zenigata, you had Shinsuke Chikaishi in that first pilot. And then in the second pilot, you had Chikao Otsuka, while Goemon in the first pilot is Goro Naya. Goemon in the second pilot is Osamu Kobayashi, and then in the actual TV show, Goro Naya jumps over and does Zenigata, and he will keep that role until 2011. And Goemon is voiced by Chikao Otsuka, who is Akio Otsuka's dad. Yep. This is the only show where he voices Goemon, though. Goemon is also replaced for part two by Makio Inoue, and that is sort of the classic voice of Goemon. But you do have Chikao Otsuka here in part one. And I think, so that's the main cast. And then, of course, the main person is Yasuo Yamada, who comes on board as Lupin for the full Part 1 anime. And Yamada would keep the role until his death in 1995, when he is replaced by Kanichi Kurata, who is still doing the role to this day. And then Inoue, Naya, and Masayama, who played, again, Jigen, Fujiko, and Zenigata, they stick around as a team through 2011. They are replaced for the Fujiko Mine series, where we get the modern actors, including
Miki Swashiro as Fujiko.
Yep, which is one of the best pieces of casting in anime history. As you can tell now, Sean, now that you know Fujiko, you know why that was such a coup to get Miyuki Sawashiro to play her in the modern stuff. But you have a lot of big names now. And then, as I said, Jigen was Kiyoshi Kobayashi forever until he was replaced by Akio Otsuka in 2021. So the Lupin the cast has been pretty consistent. But it has been so long that it's one of the few anime that really does have generations of voice talent associated with it, instead of like one major set of voices with a couple of replacements along the way, a la Dragon Ball or something.
Yeah, and it is like, I do love the kind of musical chairs nature of the pilot film, where it's like, okay, so this one Goro Naya plays Goemon, but then he eventually is Zenigata, and Chikao Otsuka is over here, and then it's like, oh, now he's going to actually play Goemon. But it is something where, I think all of the cast in Part 1 does a very good job, but it makes sense to me watching that show that they keep Yamada and Kobayashi as Lupin and Jigen, and then also Naya as Zenigata, but find different people for Fujiko and Goemon. Not to say that Yukio Nikaido as Fujiko or Chikao Otsuka Goemon are bad, but they don't feel essential to me in the way that, like, you hear one sentence from Yasuo Yamada as Lupin, or you hear one sentence from Kiyoshi Kobayashi as Jigen, you're like, you can't replace these people. Like, this is perfect. You cannot get someone else to play these characters. And so it makes sense to me that I'm excited to hear the performances in Part 2, just to see, like, where do they go with the voices for Goemon and Fujiko, because it does feel like those two characters are not fully settled in Part 1 in some ways.
Yeah, and I think, like, Yukiko Nikaido is fine, but I do think if you listen to the pilot, or there is one major episode where Eiko Masayama plays a character opposite Fujiko, and she just like has the voice down, and some of that is like, I've heard her in a lot of other Lupin stuff, so I know she is Fujiko, but I think she was probably the better pick. All of these actors have sadly passed away. I cannot find information on Yukiko Nikaido. It looks like she basically retired in 1980, so she could still be alive. She was born in 1940. She would be 83 now. But everyone else, Yamada passed away in 1995, Kobayashi in 2022, Goro Naya passed away in 2013, and the Goemon from this series, Chikao Otsuka, passed away in 2015. So again, we are dealing with an old anime here.
Yes, very old.
Yes, but these voices are a pleasure to listen to, and we will be hearing them for most of this season. We are going to get to the point where Yamada passes away and we meet Kanichi Kurata, who I also love. He's great, but we will be enjoying Yamada for some time to come. All right. I know this history section is long, but this is a complicated one, Sean.
Yes, the history section is long because it has to be long.
It has to be long. Let's talk about Part 1. So, that second pilot does the trick, and under Masaaki Osumi's direction, Lupin III is greenlit for a full anime season of 26 episodes. This will be later cut down to 23 due to production issues. It begins airing in October 1971. Osumi's version is not entirely faithful to Monkey Punch's manga, but it definitely aims to have some of the same irreverence, violence, sexual energy. I don't think these episodes feel like super risque by today's standards, but in 1971, you've got to remember, anime is like a kid's thing still. We are almost a decade away from something like Mobile Suit Gundam, which would be plenty controversial in its own way. And I think some of the stuff that happens in the early Lupin episodes, when you think about them in their time, it's not hard to understand why people kind of balked at it. You know what I mean, Sean?
Yeah, and to provide a little bit more context for this also, like, this was not like Osumi going out on a limb and deciding on his own, like, this is the way I want to do it.
Right.
Like, this was like the idea from the president of the company, Yutaka Fujioka, who was also the founder of Tokyo Movie Shinsha, who he wanted to make the adaptation. He brought Osumi on, and the idea was to make an otanamuke, or adult-oriented anime for TV, which effectively did not exist. It was like designed and marketed as such. So it's not like Mobile Suit Gundam, where You get Tomino kind of just sort of making the show much more adult than I think most of the people outside the show, like the toy manufacturers and stuff, are wanting. And obviously, like the actual age demographic for Gundam is a lot higher than it was supposed to be. This was a show that was designed to be made for adults, but there was no market for that in Japan at the time. So it's like you're trying to make an anime for adults when that's not a thing that adults are going to watch. And so that is one of the main reasons why this original version of the show bombs.
It is effectively a decade ahead of its time, if not more,
Yes.
right? Like, it is trying to do something that later on you can do, but you can't do it in 1971. So early ratings are really poor. After the first 2 episodes come out, Osumi is asked to make changes, broaden the appeal of the series. He does not want to do so, and so he is taken off the project. Meanwhile, you have two boys you might have heard of before, Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. They have recently left Toei, and they came to work at Tokyo Movie on a planned adaptation of Pippi Longstocking, for which they had been doing a lot of travel and research on before that project finally fell through. Obviously, Miyazaki and Takahata would later collaborate on stuff like Heidi, Girl of the Alps, and stuff like that was in the vein of their Longstocking project, but it didn't happen. So it fell through around the time Lupin is in trouble, and so they are selected to step in for Osumi in a fairly last-minute shift. And you can tell, because Lupin Part 1, I think it is a great show. It is much more, I think, qualitatively consistent than you would guess from this history, but you can tell there was, like, upheaval, because let's go through the numbers really quick. The first 6 episodes are all Masaaki Osumi and that kind of original vision. Episodes 7 to 15 then just don't have a director credit on them at all. Some of those are very much Osumi holdovers. Some of those are more Miyazaki and Takahata doing their thing, and some are a mixture of the two. Episode 9 is the final episode, fully directed by Osumi. It is also one of the best episodes of the show. Starting with episode 16, you then have a credit that is directed by A Productions directorial group, which we would later learn was Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. TMS gave them credit. They took credit themselves. Studio Ghibli has listed these in their archives. So we do very much know this was a collaboration at the top level between those two. A lot of the staff beneath Osumi stayed on, so there's not like the whole thing turns over, but there is that directorial turnover with a goal to try to broaden the show's appeal. And I also just want to note, even though his name is not literally on it, this is Hayao Miyazaki's directorial debut. He had done key animation and scene setting and stuff like that, and storyboarding before this, and he wouldn't actually direct again until 1978 with a show called Future Boy Conan, which is his solo directorial debut. But this is his directorial debut. It is often misstated out there that Castle of Cagliostro or Conan is his directorial debut. That is wrong. It is Lupin III Part 1, one of the many reasons this is a significant work. And I will say, I don't know the breakdown in how Miyazaki and Takahata handled their duties here. It is much more Miyazaki when you look at it than Takahata. Like, his hand is heavy on this. There's some places where I think you can feel Takahata's hand, but my just strong suspicion looking at it, especially because a lot of what they wind up doing here is recycled for Castle of Cagliostro and later Ghibli works, you can really heavily feel Miyazaki's hand in the second half of this series. And so I do kind of think of this as kind of his first big kind of use of his voice in film.
Yeah, I agree that I feel like, obviously, like, you know, Takahata is there doing work as well, but I think it's very clear that Miyazaki was closer to it. I mean, he came back. Takahata never came back to Lupin, right?
No.
So, like, Miyazaki came back to Lupin, like, it clearly, like, is something that was closer to him. And as you say, there are, like, some things in it, like Fujiko's redesign, some of the, like, the way that the use of some like the vehicles and stuff change, like there's lots of air gliders start popping up all of a sudden.
It's so great.
It gets very Miyazaki-ish.
Yes, the first episode of the show that A Productions did solo, there's a plane and Miyazaki and Lupin and Jigen are flying in a plane out of nowhere, and I just laughed my ass off because it's like they never got in a plane until Miyazaki was like, you know what? Jigen and Lupin are in a plane now. It's fucking great.
Yeah. And it is like, it's kind of a fascinating thing watching the show because you can really, I think, feel the kind of 3 phases of the show that you get. That first batch of episodes that has like a very clear, strong vision, which is the Osumi batch. And then you start to enter this like weird middle phase that overall I would say is the weakest chunk of the show, where it's like a battle where you can feel it's like some of these episodes feel more like those Osumi episodes. Some of them feel like it's turning into something different, and it's like this weird mishmash. And those are the ones where, like, when you look at the liner notes on the Blu-ray release that we watched, it's just like, how much did one person do on this versus another? Fuck it, we don't know. Like, it's because obviously, you know, the way that all this stuff happened in the production was so mixed up. But then you do enter that, like, what I think of as the Ghibli phase of the show, which is that last batch of episodes where it has, like, sort of metamorphosed into something pretty different overall. But I think the thing that is the saving grace of Lupin the Third Part 1 is that, well, I personally prefer, I think, the early stuff. I like the Osumi stuff a little bit more. Both visions of the show are really good, and that's why the show is good overall. Like, the thing that you usually get in situations like this, where you have that kind of big top-level creative turnover, is it's either a show that was good, the turnover happens, and it becomes a disaster, or it was a show that was a disaster because the person in charge was bad, they replace that person, they get someone good in charge, and then the show becomes good. I'm not sure if I've ever seen an instance of this where, okay, you had a really good person in charge, they were doing really good work, the direction wasn't working out for, you know, production or like for like the reception of the show in terms of getting an audience, so they replaced that person, but the people you replace him with is fucking Miyazaki and Takahata, and they are obviously Miyazaki and Takahata, and so the thing they're going to make is inevitably going to be really good, even if it is different. And so that's one of the fascinating things about Part 1 is it kind of 2 or 3 different shows in one? Yes. But both of those visions of the show are really, really good. And I would say the only kind of messy part of the show is that middle stretch where it's sort of meandering a bit between the two different styles, and it's kind of has that lack of consistency. That's the only stretch of the show that I feel like you get a little bit more rough episodes in there.
Yeah, I would broadly agree with that. And I would say one note I would make is I think that third segment is before the credits change, because like episode 16 is where you start crediting Miyazaki and Takahata, but I think 14 and 15, which are 2 of my favorites. That's the Emerald on the boat one, yes, and it is I forget what the other one is, but those are also like
let's catch Lupin and go to Europe is 15.
Fucking great one. And those, like, at that point they have fully taken over, they just haven't shifted the credits. So I agree with this. I would just say it's like 1 to 6 very solid, 7 to like 13 is kind of mixed, and then 14 to 23 mostly pretty solid.
And you know, episode 14 is clearly the switch, because yes, episode 14 is the most Miyazaki of all the episodes.
Yes, it's my favorite in this. Yeah,
it's probably, I would say it's my second favorite episode. It's fucking great. That is the one that ends with Lupin and Fujiko, who has now gotten her bob cut redesigned, so she just looks like a Miyazaki heroine, on a glider flying away from the boat with like a jewel, yes, which is then the shot that they use once it gets to 16, where they change the opening. They put that at the end of the new opening, and it feels like that's the stamp of like, this is now the Ghibli version of Lupin, because we have made the most Ghibli shot possible, and then we used it in the opening theme. So yes, 14 I think is clearly where that shift has fully occurred.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we're saying Ghibli. Keep in mind also, Ghibli doesn't exist until 1986. Yes. It's just like their style is so clear already. And you're so right, Sean. It's like, I don't know of any other case where you've had something that talented people doing it. It's good, but it's not working commercially. So we hand it off to someone else. But the person we hand it off to is the 2 people who will become the most famous fucking animators in the world. Like, it's such crazy, the kind of like concentration of talent above and below the line on this show. I think if we're getting into our main, like, let's get into our sort of critical thoughts on Part 1 here. I fucking love this show, and I think what's so fun about it, especially if you have even just sort of basic familiarity with Lupin, if you've seen Cagliostro or something, to watch the show like try things out, find its footing, experiment, even when it's rougher in the middle, even down to things like Yasuo Yamada, hearing him find the voice, because I don't think he's great always, but you hear his voice evolve into the version that you will recognize from later stuff. All of that seeing like this group of hyper talented animators work through the creation of something this legendary is such a treat. Like, this is not just like dry history. This show is so fun to watch kind of the legend come into focus. I love that about it.
Yeah, and so that's your perspective. Like, I couldn't, obviously, since I didn't see any later Lupin stuff, I can't really watch it that way. Because for
Right.
me, the way that the show played, like, I like the Miyazaki vision. Like, to be clear, like, I think it is very good. And again, I think it is a thing where both parts or both visions of the show, I would say, are qualitatively more or less equal. They're like
Yeah.
equally good, but they're different. I personally resonated, I think, more with the Osumi vision, which and so it was like interesting to see it transform, because it did feel like it was something that was like too experimental. It was a little bit like too on the fringe for the time. And so then it has to transform into something that's more commercial. That's something that is more, you can more sell to the kids. And there's something about the early parts of Lupin the Third Part 1 that reminded me a lot of an anime I don't think I've ever talked about on the podcast, but is a great show I watched a few years ago. That if Lupin the Third Part 1 is the most 70s ass anime ever, which in many ways is kind of like my thesis on the show, is like, this is the most 70s fucking anime I've ever seen. The most 80s anime of all time is Dirty Pair, which is very much like early Lupin stylistically, where it is taking what is a fundamentally like childish and child-focused genre, which is your like cartoon hijinks, right? Like Lupin is basically an extension of the same cartoon genre that is like Looney Tunes. You know, it's this weird action, comedy, mischief, hijinks, zany antics kind of show. But that genre you associate so much with being either kids entertainment or family entertainment. You don't ever really see it as something that is designed specifically for adults. Not in the way that it's like super dark. You know, it's not designed for adults the way that like Game of Thrones or The Sopranos is. It's not like super dark and is like, you know, has nudity all over the place and it's like incredibly gory or shit like that. It's not adult in that way. It's just when you watch those early episodes of Lupin, you can feel that the creators did not have in the back of their mind when they were making it, what if a little kid sees this show? And having to sort of like accommodate for that vision. And Dirty Pair is much the same way. It's incredibly cartoonish. It's ridiculous over the top. It's all action comedy hijinks. And it's not particularly adult in that it's like sophisticated or whatever. It just doesn't feel like they ever thought about what if a kid sees this thing. And there's a distinct pleasure to me about watching a fundamentally childish genre being executed with that, because it means that it gets to have a sort of stronger dramatic core, and it gets to do some things that are a little bit darker. It gets to play with violence and sexuality in a way that it would not be able to otherwise, but still be very comfortably in that genre. And there's something really, really fun about watching something like that, because there's so few examples of it I've ever seen. And it's so well executed early on. And then the thing that happens is it becomes the show you kind of thought that Lupin the Third was going to be. So when I started watching Lupin the Third, those early episodes, I was like really shocked by, because that was not what I thought it was going to be at all. I thought this was going to be a heist show, and it was going to be a caper of the week thing, and that Lupin's like, you know, your gentleman thief, and he's got a heart of gold and all that kind of stuff. That's not what this fucking show is at all early on. Like, heists are a very rare feature in the first 7 to 9 episodes of the show. Like, Zenigata is only in a couple of those episodes. It's not about Zenigata trying to capture Lupin. All that stuff is kind of incidental to the stories that it wants to tell, and there's something about that that's very exciting, because it's so much more different than you expected. And then when it gets to the Miyazaki stuff, that's when it's the caper of the week. Every episode is about how like Zenigata and Lupin facing off, and it's more, you know, and obviously it's more family friendly. It sort of shaves off the edges of Lupin's character, of Fujiko's character, and makes them much more family friendly. That doesn't make them bad. It just makes them different. And so that was like something that was interesting about me watching the show, is seeing it go from this sort of much more on the fringes experimental feeling thing to something that feels like, okay, I can see how this became super popular. Like, I can see how this becomes like a representative anime product for the nation of Japan, because it's much kind of closer to what you feel would be broadly sort of marketable to the public. Again, not to say that that is a bad thing. That's just like stylistically where it moves.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, I do want to say I also love both halves of this immensely. And I do think when I'm saying it was, for me, fun to kind of watch the show experiment, it's not just what I mean is that, like, it lands on the Miyazaki thing that, to be clear, is the dominant mode of Lupin moving forward, although by no means the only one. I do kind of love the bouncing back and forth. Even that middle period where it gets a little rougher, it's fun because Lupin is such a, like, slippery character who you can do so many things with. I like that in this 123 episode anime, we get so many different sides of him. And, you know, a lot of more modern, like 2000s era Lupin, starting with like the woman called Fujiko Mine, will be more of an effort to kind of reconcile these different sides of the character. And I think it is fun to see this first anime where they're grappling with that in real time. The way I would kind of describe, like, break down the two halves of it, very similar to what you were saying, Sean, is that the Osumi episodes are like more madcap and high concept. There's more of the 60s countercultural kind of thing. I think in some ways they can be more uneven, but I think at their best they also have some higher highs, just in terms of little dramatic or on the other side, big comedic moments that really kind of take you aback. What I love about the Miyazaki and Takahata episodes is that they are procedural. They are capers. It's actually kind of funny to me how many episodes you go through early on in this show without Lupin ever doing a heist, which is what in the modern popular imagination is what Lupin does. But he doesn't really do many heists until Miyazaki gets on board, and then the heists are really fun, and you get the team dynamics coming into focus. And these are things that obviously people love over the last half century of this anime. But again, I do like seeing the two halves of it. And, you know, when I look through, like, I made a little top 10 of my favorite episodes from this show, and it does just bounce between, because there's so many good things, even if the two sides of it on the extremes are very different. I think that dynamism of seeing it all in one show makes this just a must-watch anime.
It is fascinating seeing it happen. You know, like, one of the ways you can track that transformation, because it also, like, is stylistically, I think you can see how this follows with it, is how the opening theme changes. Like, I have never seen a 23 episode show that when you watch on the Blu-ray, you know, which is, this is a pretty common feature, it gives you the, like, here is the, like, creditless opening and ending theme thing where you can pick that just to watch the openings, and they're all kind of stitched together. It's 23 episodes. It's 8 minutes of opening. Like, it's fucking crazy, because there's so many different variations of, okay, it's this one with this song and this animation set without the narration. And this is with the narration, but this is with this character narrating over it. And now it's like that, but with this song. And then you go through all those variations again. And there's a point where it feels like you go 4 or 5 episodes and you've gotten a different version of the opening every single one of those episodes, because they can't kind of settle on what is the opening doing? Is it going to narrate over and give you your, like, I'm Lupin the Third, and here's all my friends, and here's, like, the premise of the show? Or is it just sort of like the first couple of episodes, which have the more kind of moody one that has no narration, until eventually it gets the, like, you have totally changed the song, and it's like, Lupin, 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 and it's, like, very high and, like, very peppy and high energy, which is very much like the kind of the Ghibli half of the show. It is very funny to see how this show, every single element of it, is sort of trying to figure out how does it modulate itself towards what it is trying to give its audience.
Yeah, it's just so cool. It is such a dynamic watching experience. It is 23 episodes that keeps you absolutely on your toes. Even when there's an off episode, it's so fucking fascinating, especially I think if you have any interest in kind of anime history. This is just a must watch. And I will admit, I had never gotten that deep into part one. I've seen some of the movies. I've seen episodes of other shows. I've seen some shows like the Fujiko Mine show in their entirety. And I think part one, there are two things that kind of intimidated me about it. One is just kind of the knowing the production history and kind of that unevenness that's baked into it. And also, we're going to have a big discussion about the music, which I love in part one. But at first, it kind of threw me off because part one has a different composer than literally everything else. So starting with part two, you get Yuji Ono, who does all the Lupin music throughout the years, other than the Fujiko Mine show, is done by the same jazz composer who did Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt. But Yuji Ono has done decades of Lupin. There's literally an entire album series called Lupin the Third Jazz that is just Yuji Ono and his jazz band doing jazz versions of the songs. And there's like 8 of those now. It's a whole fucking industry, and I just so associate Lupin with Yuji Ono. Like cards on the table, The first part 2 theme song, which is kind of the most classic Lupin theme, is maybe my favorite anime theme song of all time. It is just fucking perfect. I love it. And part 1 has a really different approach to music than...
It's blues. It's not jazz.
Blues, yes.
It's blues. Yeah.
And I think that threw me... Like, the first theme song, and a lot of the songs to come, is just Charlie Kosei crooning the words Lupin the Third. Yes. And it's not quite what... It's beautiful, and we'll talk about it. But it threw me off. And finally sitting down for this podcast and making myself watch all 23 episodes in order, this is some of the most fun I've ever had with anime. I love this show to my bones. It is so good.
Yeah, it's fucking amazing. And it is for me, it is like... the whole aesthetic package of it is what's so good. Particularly, like, I think I like it, especially the Osumi section, because it does feel like, it does feel to me like, I don't think if Miyazaki and Takahata were in charge of the show at the beginning, we would not have gotten Charlie Kosei crooning Lupin the Third for 90% of the show. You would never have gotten Lupin, he's a nice man, and all that
we'll
shit.
Get to that.
He's got Walther. You would have never gotten that, like, version of the show. And you probably wouldn't have gotten the thing of, like, the dedication of, the goddamn it, we're going to make every bit and bob in this fucking show an actual thing. Like, these are not generic cars. This is a real car. And it's like all of these cars are different real cars. And all of these guns, like, I don't know why there's so many goddamn MP40s around in Japan in 1969. I don't know if that was or 1971. I don't know if that was a thing. Everyone's got goddamn MP40s, which is like the Nazi submachine gun. There's that, I forget what it's called. There's like a World War II era Japanese submachine gun that's got that weird like clip that's on the side that a bunch of people have. You have, of course, the Walther P38 that Lupin uses, like all the watches, every little thing. Like, there's just such a weird obsessive attention to detail in the Osumi directed stuff of the show that carries over to some extent into the rest of the show, but is really focused there. And it is like, it's so unique and different. And again, like, Fringe is kind of how I think of it, because you've never quite seen something like it. And that also extends to just the quality of the animation, which for 1971, obviously it's got its gaps. It's still a TV anime, but there is so much incredible animation in this show. And I've watched some old anime, and it's like, I've never seen something from this period that looks this good. There's stuff in like that first episode, which is the one with like the I don't know if it's technically F1, whatever, like the racing cars, that there's so many cars in this like big crazy car chase. And the level of animation in detail on that for a TV episode, especially that early, is fucking mind-blowing to me. And it's all through the show. And then that's one of the things I think, even though the style changes, is very true still of the Miyazaki Takahata episodes, is that the quality that you get is so high. And you get just some clips and cuts from like the episode 14, the one on the boat, or the last episode in particular has some animation in it that you're like, how the fuck did they do this on TV? Like, we watched Mobile Suit Gundam 1979, and I love the way that show looks, and I think there is good animation in there. But there's nothing in it that on a technical level is anywhere near as good as the stuff you're seeing pretty commonly in episodes of Lupin the Third Part 1.
And again, you have... It's such a who's who of great animators, you know. I mean, not only do you have... This is Hayao Miyazaki is still doing key animation. Like, he's all over the second half of this show. You will see a cut and you're like, well, that's definitely Miyazaki, because that looked unusually good. Because he did not make his name early on as a director. He was like a guy who started out as an in-betweener at Toei and was so good they put him in key animation immediately. But that's everyone on this show. That's, Yasuo Otsuka all over this. It's unbelievable. And they all have their own obsessions. Like, you're talking about the different things that they're drawing. I think everyone is familiar with, Hayao Miyazaki has his obsession with flying machines, and when you get to his episodes, it's all in there, right? But everyone else had theirs. Yasuo Otsuka loved guns and cars, so they're all over this. And I think Osumi was very clearly, wanted to have the watches and all the kind of fashion stuff in there, and so that's here. And you can just feel all these animators with their, various obsessions, and they're able to kind of be set free because they're not having to draw, when they were at Toei, it's a lot of like Western fairy tales that they were adapting and things like that. And some of those movies are great, but they're not the level of freedom that like Lupin the Third gives you. And I think there's like a joy in this. And even, later on, Miyazaki wrote about this. He has this essay where he talks about it's after he's finished all his work on Lupin Part 2 and the movie, and he's kind of looking back on it and saying goodbye to Lupin. And at one point he talks about this show was a real struggle to make. It was hard when it finished. The head of Tokyo Movie came out and like bowed and apologized to all of us. And he said, but we loved it. We had like a ton of fun that last episode. The last episode of this show is a fucking party. It is like, clearly, it is like the world's best animators getting together and having a party, and that is the last episode of this show. And you can, I think, feel the joy in it, even amidst, I think, clearly there were difficulties and hardships, but man, you just feel the fun.
Yeah, and it's just, it infects every cell of the show how much like love and care and ambition went into making it. And it's the music, it's the aesthetics, it's the animation, it's just the overall style of the whole thing. And it's also just very fun to see something that is so kind of that's anime, but because it's more adult oriented, it's just so ingrained in the style of Japanese cinema at the time as well. And so you see that permeate throughout the whole thing. And that's partially like the music is part of that also. That's something that, like, I've seen a few of Seijun Suzuki's movies, and he always has some like weird blues theme that is like written for the movie, that has the title of the movie and the lyrics, that is sung at key points throughout the film. It's just, there's some of it honestly like weirdly reminded me of Ultra 7, which was from around this time also, which is doing some stuff like this. Obviously Ultra 7 is still fairly kids oriented, but it's more family oriented. Ultra 7 can get incredibly fucking violent in a weird way, as some of those kaiju things can. But it's just cool to see an anime that feels like it is not existing in the, as you say, the kind of classics masterpiece style that is so what you associate with that period. Which is not to say that those things are bad. It's just like, it's a different style than what you're seeing in a lot of other Japanese media in the late 60s and early 70s. And it's cool to see an anime so embody what that aesthetic was, just in animation instead.
I mean, by 1971, outside of like some sports anime, there wasn't a lot of anime that was about contemporary Japan. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I guess Mighty Atom is technically contemporary Japan, but it's such a fantasy, Tezuka version of it, right? This is like, they're going to places. They are in Japan. There's a like real like tactility to it. The other thing I will praise the Osumi section for particularly is the storyboarding and like the shot choices of Osumi's episodes, as you say, are much more informed by live action film of the time than, I think Miyazaki and Takahata, their reference are more animated. But like my two favorite episodes of this show, I said 14 earlier. The other one for me is episode 9, which is the last Osumi episode, A Hitman Sings the Blues.
The Poon episode.
Yeah, the Poon episode. That is one of the best directed and boarded episodes of any anime I've ever seen. It is like unreal how much that feels like. It almost feels like they shot a live action movie and then referenced it shot by shot, because they're doing things like with the framing that is so built around, I think, what you would do with a camera. It's just, it's constantly, it's not choices you would make for animation. And there's a lot of that in early Lupin the Third that I find fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real grounded quality to Osumi's aesthetic in those directed episodes that is very... Again, it feels like radical. It's so not what I expected. That's like, it's just my main memory of when I sat down to watch the first couple of episodes, being like, oh my God, this is what this show is? Like, what the fuck? Because I watched the first 2 episodes the first night, which is Lupin burning the car race one, and then one of the best episodes is episode 2, the band they call the Magician, the Pikel episode. Yes. An episode so good that I know that there's a movie or something called like Pikel's Revenge that I need to go seek out at some point. I don't know if that falls in our purview for this episode or for this season. I
think that would be it next season, whatever. Okay. When we do the part 2 of this Lupin journey, I will be sure to include it for you, Sean.
Good, because I got to know what happens with Pikel when he fucking comes back. But yeah, you just watch this episode, it's like, man, Lupin's not stealing a fucking thing. Like, there's no heisting going on. It's like, it's just these like weird kind of madcap, again, very like Looney Tunes-esque stories that just happen to have this like grounded 70s and late 60s like Japanese cinema aesthetic to it. And it is the thing I immediately made me think of is Dirty Pair, which obviously Dirty Pair would have been influenced by this. Dirty Pair is something we should eventually do like a mini topic on, because it's like a couple of seasons in a movie and 2 OVAs. But it is so in this, just like every episode you have no idea what the fuck you're going to see because it's so different. And because it's not formulaic, it's not a heist of the week thing, which is what the show becomes, which is fine. But because it's not that early on, every time you watch an episode, you're like, I have absolutely no idea what the fuck I'm going to see in this episode. You end up with stuff like what is my favorite episode, which is episode 4, which is the one where Lupin is captured at the beginning. Yes. It's like a loose adaptation of the second chapter of the manga. It's fairly different in a lot of ways. And he stays in jail for an entire fucking year just to fuck with Zenigata. And it's such an amazing episode because Zenigata's been in one episode at that point. Like, it has not established any of that stuff. But because the characters are so archetypal, like, it just doesn't feel like the show bothers with actually having to establish it. It knows that you know who the gentleman thief is. It knows that you know who the detective who always tries but fails to capture him is. And so they just don't even bother with telling those stories. They're like, fuck it. We want to tell the crazy story about like what happens when Lupin is captured. And we don't need to do all of the like random heist of the week episodes to build up to the special episode. Let's just have like the special episode that really plays with that relationship right out of the gate. And it's just like, it's a crazy thing that you would never see a show do. Like, episode 4 feels like an episode that should have been like episode 60 of Lupin the Third Part 2. And you're like, oh my God, look how crazy and interesting and different this episode was. And they're like, yeah, no, let's just throw it in right at the beginning of the season after Zenigata has been in one other episode.
Yes, absolutely. So, Sean, I want to go through, we've actually never covered a purely episodic anime on Japanimation Station. Uh-huh. So I think the way I want to do it is I do just kind of want to hit the individual episodes in a bit here. But before we get to that, I think we just need to cover the characters. I had a pre-existing relationship with all of these characters coming into this show, although some of them surprised me because they're different or not quite there yet, as you've said, with like Goemon and Fujiko. But what struck you, Sean? I'm just curious, like right off the bat, who's your favorite Lupin character? Of the 5 mains, who's your favorite?
I mean, I'd have to give it a tie to Jigen and Lupin. They're the two best. They're the core of the show. Jigen is the coolest character, but he also gets to be the coolest character because Lupin is there, so Lupin gets to be the main character. So it's like, it feels unfair to just give it to Jigen, even though he is unbelievably fucking cool. When I just said that Jigen was the coolest character, I want to give appropriate context. I didn't mean that in he's the coolest character in Lupin the Third. I mean, he's the coolest character in anything ever. That is how cool Jigen is. But yeah, those two are just fucking incredible. But let's start with Lupin because he is obviously the star of the show. Yasuo Yamada's performance is magical, I think, immediately. Uh-huh. It is so incredible how much he's able to immediately embody that full character. And for me, particularly in the Osumi episodes where he's asked to go to some darker places than he is later, and that full contrast of the early version of Lupin, who's a bit more anarchic, he's more amoral, right? He's very much out for himself, and he doesn't have as much of the thief with the heart of gold trope that you get in the kind of Miyazaki side of the show. And there's something about his sort of lackadaisical approach to the world, and he's just doing it for fun. And he's, just like hanging out with his buddies in this that's roped into weird mischief. And he just kind of always gets through it with like panache and with a giggle. It's a very infectious, incredibly charismatic character. And so much of that just comes through that very relaxed performance that Yasuo Yamada gives the character. And especially the laugh that he has. That's like that, yes, that sort of giggle that he has, which I watched an interview with him. And that's just what that guy's actual laugh sounds like, which is a fucking amazing. But like, and if I think it's one of the reasons why the performance works so well is it's so natural. It just feels like it's who that dude is. Not to say that that guy is like, trotting around the world and getting into heists or whatever, but that kind of very relaxed, fun-loving core to the character just is so authentic feeling that it's the engine that makes the whole thing work. The show does not work if you can't buy into the idea of Lupin being both as effective and capable as he is. You're always sure he's going to find a way to get out of every single scrape and do it in a way that's like stylish and cool, while also feeling like if he takes one wrong step, he's going to get fucking killed or get captured or whatever. And so it's like that balance is so delicate, where you have to have the utmost confidence in the character while also feeling like he's one step away from fucking everything up because he's just not taking it seriously enough. And that is such a weird characterization, but is so interesting. And it is the thing that, like, they struck absolute fucking gold that they cast this dude, because the fact that they didn't have him immediately in the pilot film or in the second version of the pilot film is like, you guys lucked the fuck out that you got this guy.
Yes.
Because he makes the whole character work.
I couldn't agree more. And like I think one of the most unadulterated pleasures of watching part one for me was Yamada, and like getting a concentrated dose of him, because I've seen things from this period. Obviously, I think as with a lot of Westerners, my introduction to Lupin was Castle of Cagliostro. Yamada is Lupin in that, and so I knew him from that. And I'd seen some other of the older stuff, but I have seen more of the modern Lupin, where it is Kanichi Kurata. And I think Kurata is also brilliant, and we'll get to him, and he's also great. But I hadn't heard Yamada in like a concentrated, series of episodes like this before. And he's so good. All the things you were saying, Sean. I also think it is absolutely magical how he kind of makes this whole weird show cohere. Like, Lupin's characterization does change quite a bit, but I think Yamada convincingly sells you that this is the same person from episode 1 to 23.
Yeah.
He can be the amoral huckster. He can be the dude living on a knife's edge because he has nothing better to do, which my favorite version of that is episode 4, where he just sits in prison for a fucking year waiting for an execution because he wants to fuck with Zenigata, or he can have, like, I think an episode that really is a turning point for Miyazaki's characterization, and this is late in the game, is episode 21, Rescue the Tomboy, where there's this girl who is the daughter of a basically the Jigen to Lupin II, like Lupin II's his father's partner, and he is rescuing this girl, and he is being sort of the noble, self-sacrificial protector, and that is something you get in stuff like Cagliostro or the most recent movie Lupin III the First. And I just think Yamada sells that is all part of this person, that this is all Lupin is a fucking chameleon, but there is some core there, and that voice just sells it. It's beautiful. It's kind of like Jim Henson as Kermit the Frog or something, where like that original voice that just, you hear it for like a second and it's like getting in a warm bath. The voice is just so perfect and comforting. And, obviously we are not the first to say this. He is one of the most celebrated voice actors and voices in history. I know you mentioned earlier, like, favorite voice actors. I know Yamada has topped those polls before in Japan.
Yes.
Like, it's a beloved performance.
Yeah, it is. It's for very good reason. It's just immediately incredible. But then, of course, then you also have Kiyoshi Kobayashi as Jigen Daisuke, which it makes sense why, they're just like, hey, man, do you kind of want to keep doing the voice? Fuck it. I know you're like 80 years old, but you want to come back in? Like, let's go for it. Because, yeah, it is, like, Jigen is a fascinating character, just because I think it's one of those characters that I knew was in Lupin. Like, I knew he had, like, this right-hand man who was the cool dude with the hat and the beard and the revolver. But I never had, like, a good, on the outside looking in, I never had a good, like, sort of feel for what that relationship was between the two of them, just because it's not what you expect, I guess. Like, it's just, you don't really see, you look at Lupin and how kind of, 60s, 70s he is, like, I think he's almost like a hippie in some ways. He's still dressed up in the suit, but it's like he's so relaxed and loose. And then Jigen feels like much more tight, right? He got his tie all done up. He's got his like holster, like he's got his hat and everything. But there's something about that combination of the characters where Lupin is so much more loose and fun loving. Jigen is much more straight laced while still being, obviously he's still a criminal. But he's willing to just sort of like go along with Lupin on all of the wacky adventures, and that sense of loyalty and friendship he has with Lupin, which never is like sort of explained or explored, but it doesn't need to be. Like, you just feel this like natural camaraderie between these two people, and that they are the core of the show. Like, I know that obviously, particularly later on, they start making Fujiko a more like kind of regular part of the gang, and then Goemon is sort of sometimes in episodes. Goemon, when we get to him, this character that I feel like the show doesn't really know what to do with. But at its core, this show is about Lupin and Jigen going on adventures, Lupin coming up with like harebrained schemes, Jigen going, "You're a goddamn idiot and this is going to fuck up, but hell, I'm going to go along with it anyways," and then they get through it by the skin of their teeth, and that's like such a great setup. And, you know, Jigen being the coolest motherfucker on the entire goddamn planet, you know, he is the character that I think embodies Monkey Punch's visual style the most. Like, he's a character that you cannot draw without him looking at least a little bit like a Mad Magazine character. And so I think that's also one of the things that makes him so cool, is like the whole aesthetic of the character with the hat that covers the eyes and the big like curved beard that comes out from under it. It's like he has to look like a Monkey Punch character or he cannot exist. It's so essential to his fundamental character design. That's one of those things that just makes the character incredibly fun and cool, and you just want to look at that dude do stuff because he looks awesome.
I could not agree more. And yeah, Jigen, I think in my head has always been my favorite Lupin character. Part of that is that like he is literally the rock of this series, in that he is the one who's always there with Lupin. And Kobayashi is, no matter what era of Lupin you're watching, until like literally 2 years ago, he was Jigen, just in everything, you know, no matter who else was acting opposite. And we're going to have to do a second season of this at some point, Sean, to do the modern stuff, if for no other reason that old man Kobayashi as Jigen might be even better than young man Kobayashi as Jigen. It's such a fun version of the character the older that voice gets. But obviously it's perfect here. And it's exactly what you're saying. I love, like, he is there to be entertained by Lupin as much as he is there to go on heists with him, right?
Yes.
Like, one of my favorite little character dynamics is in that 4th episode that we keep referencing when Lupin is in prison for a year. Fujiko wants this key that Lupin has, and so she keeps trying to break into the prison, and Jigen just keeps stopping her and going, "No, we're going to see what Lupin does here," because Jigen wants to see the show. He wants to see the fireworks. Yes. What is this idiot going to do? And he just waits and waits, and it's fucking great. And that character dynamic, you know, there is like no more comforting anime pairing to me than when Lupin and Jigen walk on screen together. And I'm just like, this episode could be crap, but I'm in for a good time because these two are on screen and they are such good buddies, and I love it.
Yeah, and it is like they are the core of the show. Like, they're the two essential things. Like, you can't have an episode that doesn't have... Obviously, you can't have an episode that doesn't have fucking Lupin in it. You also can't have an episode that doesn't have Jigen in it, though. Like, those characters have to go together. I think there is one episode Jigen doesn't appear in, and it's easily my least favorite. It's near the end, and it's the one where Lupin winds up on the island with the phony Lupin. Yeah.
That one, yeah, I think that is the only one without Jigen. The only other recurring character who's in it is Zenigata, and I think that one really suffers for Lupin. Like, Lupin as a character feels adrift in that one because, I don't know, I feel like he needs Jigen to bounce off of at least a little bit. It doesn't have to be the whole episode. You know, there are episodes where it's more about Lupin and Fujiko or Lupin and Goemon or something, and that's fine. But I think, like, you at least need the first 5 minutes with them in the car together talking about the harebrained scheme. It's just like, it's a level set for Lupin stories.
Yeah, like, as you said, he's the bedrock. Like, he's the thing, he's the center that the show has and that Lupin sort of like jumps out of. But he's like this constant presence that needs to be there, that like straight line that you have to have to contrast everything else. And in some ways, he's like, in a weird way, he's like the audience surrogate. He's the position, you're in like the Jigen position of, you have utmost confidence that somehow Lupin is going to figure this out, right? That's part of the thing with episode 4 is the reason why he keeps stopping Fujiko isn't just because he's curious about what Lupin's plan is. It's also that he's 100% confident Lupin has a plan. He's going to figure out how to get out of it. And it's not until like the last minute that he decides to go in just to ask Lupin, like, like, you have a plan, right? Like, you're going to get the fuck out of here, right? And it's like that complete faith that he's going to get out of it, but wanting to see how does he do it. That's the position the audience is in. And so that's one of the reasons why you need to have Jigen there, is because he centers everything.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love these two characters. I will say, though, in terms of my preconceived notion coming into part one is Jigen is my favorite, Zenigata challenged it. He is so good in this show. Especially like Goro Naya, I think I had not heard a ton of his version of Zenigata. I've heard, Koichi Yamadera plays him today, and obviously a great voice actor, and a very good choice to play Zenigata. But man, I love Goro Naya's Zenigata. I think this show is so fucking good at putting him in situations where you feel so bad for him. Like, he is the most put upon fucking police officer in the world because he is chasing someone who, it's like, it is Sisyphus. He is Sisyphus. He can roll, even if he gets that boulder up the hill, if he gets Lupin in prison, it doesn't fucking matter because Lupin will sit in there for a year and drive him crazy. Zenigata is such a pleasure in this show. I love him so much.
Yeah, he's one of those characters that like feels like he's really crucial to that switch over. Because he's not in the Osumi episodes that much. And again, like the main episode that really features him is episode 4, which, as I said, like that episode features him in a way where you understand who he is as an archetypal character more than you like understand him as a person or whatever. And that episode is fantastic with the joke of, what does the detective who always tries to fail the thief, but the thief always gets away, what does he do once that thief is captured? And seeing him just sort of sweating this, like, where he's exactly like Jigen, like he knows that Lupin must have some plan, and it's just driving him insane that nothing is happening. And that is like an incredible way to use the character. But then in the second half of the show, once you get the sort of Miyazaki Ghibli kind of version, he is that kind of linchpin character that allows the procedural shift to happen. To the point where he even gets a catchphrase, right? Where he gets his catchphrase that he says in a bunch of episodes. It's like, "I'll catch you next week, Lupin."
Yes.
He is the character that sort of turns it into the more Saturday morning cartoon version. And as you say, like there's something very fun about the like put upon detective who knows that who needs to catch Lupin. It's his obsession in life, and Lupin always gets away. And I think it is like the most essential thing to how that shift occurs in terms of like the structure of the show, to the point where, the last episode is so much about just that kind of recurring cycle of Lupin coming up with the heist, Zenigata trying to get the better of him, Zenigata seemingly getting the better of him for a moment, and then Lupin having like a backup plan or coming up with something on the spot that allows him to get away, and it repeats that cycle like 3 times until he's swimming after Lupin and Lupin swimming away in the bay. It is like very much that is like the show that it has transformed into. And yes, like Goro Naya's sort of like put upon antics, it is sort of like very beaten down performance, and his obsession with capturing Lupin is incredibly fun.
It's so good. There's a string of episodes in the middle there. The one we already mentioned that's brilliant, the Emerald Secret, where they're on the cruise ship, and Zenigata, like poor fucking Zenigata in that one, where he is being tricked by like at least 3 different people. You have Lupin, Fujiko, and Catherine, the woman who has the jewel in this one. And this is also where you get, I think Miyazaki in particular loved drawing Zenigata, because Zenigata gets some of the best character animation, where it's this very rubbery, like silly, exaggerated movement that like I think Yasuo, Otsuka, and Miyazaki, you can just see there's a lot of moments where I think they just did it personally. We know that in The Emerald Secret, because there's a dance scene that Miyazaki, we know, drew himself. But you have that one, and that is followed by the one that is Let's Catch Lupin and Go to Europe, which is all about poor Zenigata. He's going to Europe for this fun police conference, but he wants to get Lupin first, and he does it. But then as he's flying away, Lupin is waiting there with the gang to send him off, and it's just so mean and wonderful, and you just feel for this poor guy who, again, he is in this Sisyphean struggle where not only is he having to roll the boulder up the hill, but he doesn't actually really want the boulder to get up the hill, because he is secretly Lupin's biggest fanboy. He wants to see what Lupin will do. He loves this dude. This is something the new movie, Lupin the Third, the First, has a ridiculous amount of fun with that dynamic. And this is the thing that, like, I think the cool thing about the two halves of this show is that they each do things the other one doesn't do, right? So like there's certain like stylistic ticks and unpredictable things about that first half that you're not going to get in the Miyazaki eps. But in the Osumi eps, you're also not going to get all of the fun of the Zenigata antics and things like that. And of course, the big thing that I think the Ghibli-esque section gives is this kind of repeatable engine where, like, you could not make a 50-year anime franchise out of those first couple episodes, right?
No.
But this comes up with an engine where you're like, I can imagine watching this every week for the rest of my life and it being funny in almost a Tom and Jerry kind of way, just, eternally archetypal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you do get, for me, a big Zenigata moment is in that last episode, just to sort of define that relationship where Lupin has this ploy where he's like, I have a bomb here. If you take one more step forward, I'm going to set it off. And then he and the gang gets in that thing and the bomb seemingly goes off. And then there's this shot of like Zenigata like weeping as he thinks Lupin has died. It's like, oh, that's his entire purpose in life, right? It's the same kind of thing that episode 4 does. But yes, like it is a very effective archetypal thief detective relationship that is just kind of like that dial is really kind of just pushed to 11, particularly in the second half of the show.
Yeah. And then the last two members of our main cast are the ones who are least defined at this point, although they both have some standout moments. Fujiko Mine, obviously major character, would eventually get her own show. Here is kind of whatever the story, and this is true about Fujiko in a lot of versions of Lupin from the manga on, she's kind of whatever the episode needs her to be, and often fairly ill-defined, although there are some standouts. Like I said, one of my favorites is episode 9, which is very much a Fujiko episode. That's with her and her old boyfriend Poon, and it is about her past, and that is one that very much feels like that was a touchstone episode for Mario Okada on The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, and that is a brilliant one. There's other where Fujiko is much less well-defined. What did you think of meeting Miss Mine Fujiko here?
Well, I think she is a great character in the Osumi section of the show. I think in that section of the show, she is fascinating because it feels like she's ill-defined because she doesn't let herself be defined, right?
Yes.
She is... Because that's where I think, like, kind of my read on the characters, she's a sociopath, right? She doesn't care about anyone or anything other than herself. And she is using and manipulating absolutely everybody in her life. She does not actually care about Lupin. She doesn't actually care about Poon, right? She is using all those people. And there's, like, that mystery to who is she? Like, where did she come from? Who is she really? And what made her to be the way that she is? That, like, I think is the thing that allures Lupin to her, because I think he knows that there's a lot more to her and that she's the only person that can trick him. And so that early dynamic of the show where she pretty frequently gets the better of Lupin and at the end of the episode actually like gets the gear or like gets whatever and gets away. I think in that section, she's a really fascinating character that in many ways is the kind of, and the way that I just said that Zenigata is kind of like the linchpin of the Miyazaki section. Zenigata is the thing that makes those plots and the structure of the show work. Fujiko is honestly kind of that for the Osumi section. Most of the plots, even if it's not a Fujiko-centric episode, they really function because Fujiko is there. Like, even like the two Goemon episodes, Fujiko is really essential to how that works, and her like kind of being the actual motivation that Lupin has to do the things that he does is typically Fujiko, because he doesn't care about wealth. He doesn't care about like any of that kind of stuff. What he cares about is one, his pride, and he also cares about he cares about this woman in like kind of in a possessive way. He wants to kind of own her. He wants her to love him actually and like legitimately, and not in that kind of like flirtatious way that they have this flirtatious relationship. And it's the one thing that he can never have. And that dynamic I think is fucking lightning. And it's really good. I think there are some episodes that do it better than others because I think it's a harder thing to do than the Zenigata detective thing. But I think when it works well, it's fucking great. And episode 9, as you say, is one of the best episodes. And that's one that is so much about that dynamic and trying to figure out, like, how is there anything more to her in terms of does she actually feel for these people or not? I think it's fantastic. One negative for, like, the Osumi section is there is, because of the, like, deeper willingness to go into like sexual stuff. There are a couple of scenes, particularly the worst is in episode 1, where she gets her like, it's that bad trope of like the female spy getting her clothes ripped off and shit and like using sexual violence to threaten her. That stuff I'm not particularly cool with, but the show gets away from that pretty quickly, even the Osumi section. I think Fujiko is kind of a casualty of the switchover, though. I think in the second half of the show, she's just not interesting. She becomes more like, she just becomes a member of the gang. There are a couple of episodes where they do the thing of where, oh, she's actually like really working for her own interests and tries to trick Lupin, but it doesn't play anywhere near as well. Because I think they've tried to sand off the sexual dynamic between the two characters, it doesn't work anymore. And it's like the whole connection between the characters, I think, is like fundamentally sexual. And so when you're not trying to present that, even in a kind of like coy way, like Fujiko as a character and her relationship with Lupin doesn't really work. And so even when they try to do those plots in the second half, I'm not saying that those episodes are necessarily bad, but Fujiko's role in them is no longer compelling because all the kind of like lightning and spice out of that character dynamic, I think, has been sanded off. And then that's also where they then change her style to look more like a Ghibli heroine, which then just kind of makes her, she doesn't look like the sort of unattainable femme fatale who's also a chameleon. She just looks like somebody's mom, you know, like she's like your buddy. And that just kind of, I think, robs Fujiko of a lot of like the power the character had in the first 9 or so episodes.
Yeah, I broadly agree with that, and I will just say, Sean, whenever on this podcast, in whatever format we eventually get to the show, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, I think it's going to be your favorite Lupin thing because of what you just described. Mario Okada got that, and that is what that show is, and it is brilliant. But like my whole thesis on that show that I think is brilliant is it's kind of a return to Lupin's origins, stylistically, tonally, and with that Fujiko Lupin dynamic, but it is also a corrective to some of the sexism you see in the early Lupin episodes, and so because it centers the woman instead of the man, and it's a really interesting show that gets all that. And I broadly agree that I do think Fujiko, when she is just kind of a buddy, like Lupin has a buddy, he has Jigen. I don't think he needs Fujiko as a buddy in that same way. I think you can make it work in the Ghibli format. I think episode 14 is a good example of that, where they are fighting for that emerald and they wind up working together, but it's very different than like his relationship with Jigen, where they are also constantly competing, and I think that can be fun. I do think, though, their relationship in this show is at its best in those early episodes where Lupin honestly usually fails because Fujiko gets the better of him by the end. And I think Osumi is also good at kind of hinting at some pathos there where like she really is unknowable. That episode 9, what makes it in that film noir femme fatale thing is at the very end, the last shot is her just staring out at the ocean holding that jewel she got. And like, we don't really know what she's thinking or if she's feeling bad about what she did to Lupin, what she wants to do next. Maybe she just feels empty. But she's a little unknowable. And that is, that is very much, again, what Mario Okada will do, what Miyuki Sawashiro, I think, will do with her vocal performance in later Lupin stuff. And yeah, I do think, I'm curious to see what we see in sort of the future episodes this season, Sean, in like part 2 and part 3, where I know she is more part of the gang, and I've seen little bits and pieces, but I'm curious, some of them just, like, Castle of Cagliostro is very much one where Miyazaki kind of ditched what he didn't need, and so Fujiko is barely in that one, and same with Goemon, which is probably for the better if you don't know. Not every Lupin character needs to be in every story. That's part of what's fun about it. But yeah, I think I broadly agree. And again, we talked about the voice actor earlier. I don't think she's bad or anything. I do think there is I feel like there should be a little more of an edge to the voice, and I do think that's what Eiko Masuyama gives in the pilots and all of the later stuff. And so I do think it was smart to bring her back for part 2 and beyond.
Yeah, I agree that, Yukiko Nikaido is not bad, but it's not, an essential feeling performance. I mean, it's a character that you watch in those first 9 episodes, and obviously I knew that this is a character that Miyuki Sawashiro very famously plays later. I mean, in that thing I was talking about earlier of that, 100 best voice actors, Miyuki Sawashiro was put in the top 10. Now, that is partially because she kind of, I think, inherited it a little bit through being Fujiko Mine. That was the main thing they were referencing. Also, she's really fucking good. I mean, she's a very popular voice actress in Japan.
Right.
Outside of that context regardless, but probably not in the top 10 of all time next to, people who have passed away 10 years ago because they're playing,
Right.
a character everyone grew up with, right? She kind of inherited a little bit of getting that position from Fujiko Mine. But I obviously know this is a character that Miyuki Sawashiro is going to play. And so when watching those first 9 episodes, I'm like, yes, this is Miyuki Sawashiro, lots of female voice actors, I feel like, particularly at this time, are a lot give performances a lot like Yukiko Nikaido, where it feels like they're kind of playing it more generic than a lot of the male voice actors get to do, right? There's you see this in a lot of stuff, and you don't get as many of what you see with voice actresses today, where they have very distinctive voices, where instead of them trying to sand down the edges of their voice and the things that make them sound really unique, they lean into it really hard. And so it's very easy to distinguish voice actresses today based on their voices because of how much they lean into the kind of quirks of their voice that really set them apart. I feel like in a lot of stuff, and you see this, this is something I remember feeling when we were watching through all of our stuff with Weekly Suit Gundam, you saw that shift stylistically happen, where early on, so many female voice actors are kind of asked to make their voice sound more generic and kind of more contained. And I feel like that's kind of what happens to Yukiko Nikaido, and that's just you can't do that with Fujiko. She needs to have such a powerful feeling voice, I think, in order for that character to fully sell. It's probably a little bit early for this, but honestly at the time I would think Mami Koyama, who played Kaisuya Zabi in the original Gundam, obviously a million things, she's a great voice actress. That's the kind of voice that I think you would want Fujiko to have. And this is just feels like a normal, fairly plain and too plain for how interesting the character is. Honestly, the performance is much more appropriate for the second half of the show, where the character is much more plain than she is in that first half.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, as you're saying, it's not necessarily that these individual actresses were doing this. It's very much a direction thing.
Yes.
Because it's kind of just industry wide, and it will be for a couple years after this. Yeah, but definitely an interesting character, and it's always been funny to me because you are such a big Miyuki Sawashiro fan, and one of her most famous characters is the one you hadn't seen yet, and so yes. I'm very excited to kind of get to that point eventually where we see her as Fujiko, because she is I think out of all actors in time and space, she is the one who is most Fujiko Mine. Just obviously, yeah. The only problem in 1971 is she wasn't born yet, so she couldn't be Fujiko yet. So yes. Anyway. And then our final character here is Goemon Ishikawa the 13th, which is a great detail. Goemon Ishikawa obviously is a character from, Japanese folklore. He's the one who's boiled alive, right? Is his story?
Yes. As you have the Goemon Budo is that name for that kind of pot bath, yes. So named after the both folklore character, though he did actually exist. Although I don't know if that detail of him being boiled alive, I think that's an exaggeration. But yes, that is who Goemon was.
Yes, if you're a One Piece fan, the character of Kozuki Oden and his death in One Piece is very inspired by the historical Ishikawa Goemon. But Goemon is a character the series often kind of doesn't quite know what to do with, because I think part of the joke of Lupin is that every character is to some degree an anachronism, but Goemon is a literal anachronism in that he is a samurai in the modern era. My favorite version of Goemon is also the one in Woman Called Fujiko Mine. He has such good episodes in that one, and his relationship with Fujiko is really interesting. I think he has a couple of standouts here. I think his first episode, The Coming of Goemon, which is based on a manga chapter that's very good. I like that one. It's one of my favorites in this series. I think it's got a really good premise. I like the whole idea of Goemon being tasked to kill Lupin, but he doesn't know what Lupin looks like, and Lupin is just there with him, is great. And there's a couple other standout scenes, but he is definitely the one. I think this is frequently a problem with Lupin media, is I don't think they necessarily give a good reason for why Goemon would be going along with the crazy heists, because that doesn't seem like his MO. This is something I think, again, the Fujiko show does a really good job at trying to figure out why would he actually be doing the things he's doing. And he is someone who doesn't feel supernatural, just kind of being part of the gang and palling around. But I still love, he's Goemon, I still love him. And it is interesting to hear Chikao Otsuka, who is a great voice actor, even though I do think the actor they will get for him later on does feel like a more correct voice. But obviously, Otsuka is one of the greats, so... Yeah,
Chikao Otsuka is a great voice actor. I think the problem is that he's really, really good as Goemon in the first 2 episodes, episode 5 and episode 7. When his role is to be an enemy of Lupin, but then when he has to become part of the gang, it's just well, there's nothing for him to do. And so it's a really weird I'm very curious to see more stuff, because I want to see something that has Goemon as part of the gang that uses him well, because no episode in this uses him well. Like, he's fine sometimes. He shows up, he does a Zatoichi thing. I appreciate that it's very specifically, it's the same kind of sword that Zatoichi has, that he has in the reverse grip or whatever. I don't know if like other stuff did that, but it immediately made me think of Zatoichi. And I appreciate that, but he just kind of shows up, he cuts a thing, he goes, ha ha ha, and then he walks away. And then it's like, okay, well, there you had your requisite Goemon for every other episode of the show. But in those first 2 episodes, when he's set up as an adversary, that's really interesting. Like, I think that works really well, because he's a person that Lupin cannot physically overcome in any way, right? The whole joke with Goemon is that he's like Superman, basically. He's so good with the sword and he's so good with his physical prowess that nobody can overcome him in a physical altercation in any way, shape, or form. So Lupin has to find a way to outsmart him, but Goemon's also not dumb. So it's like you have to actually be very clever in how you outsmart him. That dynamic works really well. And I kind of, obviously, like, the manga existed and all that kind of stuff. So I understand that, like, they don't really have a choice in what they do here. But I don't understand why Goemon becomes a part of the gang. He would be much more interesting recurring antagonist than he would be as one of Lupin's buddies. And so in those 2 episodes, when he's more of a foe, but one who doesn't like have a personal hatred of Lupin, he's doing it out of a sense of like pride. I think that's a really compelling dynamic where there is a friendliness between him and kind of respect between him and Lupin, but they're still fighting each other. That works really well. Him just showing up to cut open a bank vault or something is just, that's not a character. He might as well be a drill that they show up that talks every now and then. Like, that's all he is in the second half of the show.
Yeah, and I think even in the liner notes on these Blu-rays by Reed Nelson, he acknowledges that, like, Goemon is frequently a deus ex machina in various pieces of Lupin media, because he is just a hard character to know what to do with. But there are, I will say, I have definitely seen ones that do it well later on, even if this is not always one of them. But there are, if you are a Goemon fan and if you've never seen part 1, I do think, like, his first 2 episodes here, 5 and 7, are 2 of my favorite Goemon episodes ever. They're really good. And yeah, again, and it is fun. This is the only time Chikao Otsuka did it, so that is also enjoyable. One last note on the characters I will just say before I get any emails about this. Yes, Lupin does have one of the more famous English dub casts of all time. That is, I know, also a cool thing. I have once in a while switched over and just to hear, and I do like, I do not watch dubs. Sean doesn't watch dubs. I will say, every time I've heard from the main Lupin cast, they are great. It is cool that there is a cast that people love that has stayed pretty consistent. The one that impresses me most is Michelle Ruff, who was Yukari in Persona 3, and she is Fujiko Mine. That is, like, the person who would be a good English Fujiko. I can't think of anyone else who could do that. I've always enjoyed Tony Oliver's Lupin when I've heard him, Richard Epcar's Jigen. I do think it's cool that they have that, and I do find it amusing that Part 1 was dubbed in 2021 for the 50th anniversary, which is there have been dubs done for even older stuff, but it is close to the longest ever between, like, original production and dub, and I do find it very funny that you can switch over from, the tapes are old for the 1971, Lupin. Those voices come through pretty scratchy, and then you can switch over to a dub made in 2021, which I find very funny.
Yes, and it was hilarious every time I switched the disc on the Blu-ray and it defaulted to the English dub, and then, like, an English voice. And again, like, I didn't listen to much of the dub. It was good, but it was very shocking every time you have this very crystal clear, my name is Lupin the Third. And it's like, oh my God, because you're looking at something from fucking 1971, and it sounds like, like somebody just walked into the room and said that, which I think is literally what I thought when I put the second disc in. I had got up to get a thing of water, and I just hear from the other room just a dude say, hey, my name is Lupin the Third. I'm like, who came into my house? What is happening? But yes, I actually pulled up the Fujiko Mine one because I was trying to remember who I saw and listened to a couple of them, and it was like, yes, right, it's Michelle Ruff. And I also noticed that literally, I don't know in what she plays this. It must be like one movie where they did the whole different cast. Fucking Mami Koyama literally did play Fujiko Mine in something. So we might end up seeing that. I did not know that when I said that she would be a good actress from this time to play that character. So
that's great.
I'm curious to see where that pops up.
That is one that we will be watching in episode, I think, 6 this season, is we're going to watch The Fuma Conspiracy, which is this OVA where they did a completely different cast as a one-off. And it's a bunch of like great actors like Mami Koyama. And I've never seen it. It's kind of hard to find even, but it'll be fun to see a totally different cast give a take on it for like this one-off adventure. So there you go.
I swear I did not know that when I said that she'd be a good actress. So that is a coincidence.
Sean, the fucking music in this show.
Oh my God.
Gotta talk about it. It is God. Good. Again, I totally understand, because I was there too at one point. If you're like, you listen to it at first and you're kind of turned off because it is so different from the Yuji Ono stuff. But man, it is. The composer is Takeo Yamashita and the singer is Charlie Kosei. And that sweet crooning of like 99% of the words in the soundtrack to this show is some combination of Lupin, the Third, or Sansei, the Japanese phrase of the Third. And then a couple other words like Walther and P38. Yes. It's amazing. It's so good, Sean.
It is one of my favorite soundtracks for any TV anime I've ever seen. It was one of those things that when I started watching it, I was like, I cannot believe how good this is and how different it feels. Because there's so much vocal music. It just permeates the entire show. To the point where like they're not insert songs. Like they're technically insert songs, I guess, but they don't feel like that. They're just like, I think it's one of the reasons why they typically, it's not Charlie Kosei saying Lupin Sansei. Usually it is him saying Lupin the Third. I think it's like to put it in the English language to make it more part of the background audio when you're watching it with Japanese being the actual dialogue, right? And yeah, it's amazing. Like, people should also, if you haven't seen what he looks like, especially today, people should Google Charlie Kosei, because he's the coolest looking motherfucker. He looks exactly like you want that guy to look, is what I will say for Charlie Kosei. It's amazing. Like, one of the great tragedies is that the original masters of the soundtrack were lost shortly after the finishing of production. So you cannot get the like original recordings of the soundtrack. There are like releases that have cut together from clips of the show and kind of reconstructed the tracks, but of course you get occasional background audio from the show in there. And then there are some very good modern albums, many of them featuring Charlie Kosei, that do reinterpretations of the music and stuff, and some of those are fucking amazing. But it is really sad to me that I can't just get the original version of Nice Guy Lupin and just play that on background for my entire life. Because the newer versions are cool, but they don't have that certain je ne sais quoi of a legit 1971 scratchy recording of this old bluesy ballad song about how Lupin is a nice man, when no, he is not a nice man. He's a very bad man, at least in the first few episodes when that song originally plays.
It's so special and weird, and and then of course we're talking about all the English stuff. There's also the ending theme that is the only consistent thing through all these episodes, is you have the same ending theme, and that is the only song that is in Japanese. That song is a karaoke favorite in Japan, and I can tell why, because I sang along with it every fucking time. Wathapi sanju hachi kono te no nakani. It's so good. It's such a great like crooning blues song. Oh my gosh, Sean. Sometimes you and I like to do dramatic readings of songs on this show, and I think we got to do a few of these. If you pull up the liner notes at the end, I did put up all the lyrics from the liner notes, and I think I need you to read a couple of these to us, Sean.
Okay, let me pull that up. God, there are so many different variations of the fucking theme songs in this show.
Yes. And I'll just talk about that really quick, because you have the opening theme one that is only used a couple of times, and that is where he is singing just the word Lupin the Third over and over again. You have the second version that is one of the it's called Afro Lupin 68, which is kind of the insert song, but that's where you have Yasuo Yamada narrating.
Yes.
Then you finally have the one at the end that is actually not sung by Charlie Kosei. It's performed by Yoshihiro Hiroshi. That is just the Lupin, 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 Lupin. And I love that one too. So yes, you have a lot. You have 4 overall songs between the ending and the 3 openings, which, I mean, Sean, in the 70s, there are shows that ran for hundreds of episodes and only ever had 2 songs. So this show has a crazy number for its time.
Yes, I mean, it is hilarious that Identity Crisis just, like, gave rise to all these different variations. Because obviously, like, one of their early Hail Mary attempts to try to sort of make the show more accessible or whatever was to put that narration in at the beginning. Because again, the choice to replace Osumi happened after episode 2 aired. So it's like episode 4 is when they go in to add in the narration, right? So like clearly like that was as soon as they could do that for an episode, they're like, well, we can do that because obviously, you know, they replaced Osumi, but it was already airing. So it's like, they needed that like run up time to give the A production team to come in and do their stuff for the second half of the show. Then eventually, once it becomes fully their thing, that's when it's totally transformed. But yes, it is hilarious to see that shift happen. Luckily, though, they did leave that ending theme untouched because obviously there's no reason to fuck with that, and it's perfect. I will say my favorite version of the opening is just the original from the first 3 episodes. It's my favorite song, and it's my favorite, like, you know, I don't need the opening, like, what do you want, Dupin Sansei? Like, I don't need any of that kind of stuff. I just want to appreciate Charlie Kosei crooning, and look at the cool shots from the pilot film that look much more expensive than the shots in the show. That's all I really want.
You want to do a dramatic reading of it for us, Sean?
For which one?
The first one, the one you love. I want to hear your dramatic interpretation.
Okay. Let me pull this up. Here we go. This is a dramatic reading of Lupin the Third theme song 1, performed by Charlie Kosei with the music by Takeo Yamashita. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Daba, 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 daba. Daba, 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 da. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third. Lupin, 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 Lupin. Lupin the Third.
Who do you think this show is about, Sean? I don't really know after that theme song.
Is it Fred Flintstone, you know, Dabba Dabba Doo? I think.
Now I'm imagining a version of the Flintstones theme that is just the name Fred Flintstone 60 times.
Flintstone, Fred Flintstone. Yeah, every show should just do that. It would be the best.
I think it speaks to how great Lupin is as a character, that you can have a show full of songs that are just his name over and over, and it fucking slaps.
I mean, it is a very aesthetically pleasing Dupin. It's a very good, it almost sounds like it could be a bluesy, like, kind of scat insert or something, with like the dabadoos and stuff. Lupin.
Yes. Okay, Afro Lupin 68. This is a scat number by Charlie Kosei. You got to read these lyrics to us, Sean.
Yes. P38, Walther. Machine cries, the Walther. P38, the Walther. Machine cries, Walther. You got to smile, feel it, get angry. Keep cool, man. Gotta smile, and you feel it. You gotta get angry, cool, cool man. Lupin the Third, go, go. Go, Lupin the Third. Lupin the Third. Lupin the Third.
I love it. It's so good. It's so silly. And finally, I think, unless do you want to read the ending song for us?
Sure. Yeah. Should I just read the English translation?
Yeah, go for it. Just get us our beat. I just want to get all of our beat poetry Lupin songs done on the podcast, because people will ask if we don't do it. This is one of our favorite segments. Sean does beat poetry to weird songs,
and they are blues, so it does fit.
Yes.
He kicks off the red waves that entwine around his feet as machine guns scream, resembling the crazy morning light It's his Walther P-38. Everything he holds in his own two hands is bound by fate to disappear on him, Lupin the Third, Lupin the Third.
I love it. That is, and I think this is like broadly considered the best ending theme in the Lupin canon, and for good reason. That is a great song. And yeah, I next time I'm going to Japan, I'm definitely doing karaoke to that song, because it's also really easy to sing, even if you don't know much Japanese.
And it is like, if you look up Charlie Kosei on YouTube, there's like 1,000 videos of him doing this in different live performances, which is how you can tell how popular it is. And they're all so good. Because it's that kind of thing where he, as like an older musical artist now, like he really relishes it when he does like more modern versions of it, where he fucking will hold on some of those syllables for like 3 measures longer than in the original version, and it's fucking delightful. My god.
The goofiest thing in the original recording is at the end, it's Rupan Sansei, and then he does a breath and goes,
yeah, he goes up, yeah.
It's so weird. I love it. By the way, you mentioned that there are different re-recorded albums. The one I have to recommend, and Sean, the other day, I was at the dentist in the waiting room, and I found this album on YouTube, and I was so excited. They were calling me in, and I was texting you, like, just a second, doctor. I have to let Sean know about this album.
Yes, if you texted me during it happened to be exactly when my planning period started at school. So I did a shit ton of grading listening to this album that you had sent and linked to me on YouTube. Yes. It was like fucking it's really good. It's very good grading music, I'll say.
It's called Guy's Heart, Charlie's Lupin Songs. You can find it on YouTube. It's hard. I have not found like a good download of it yet, and I think next time I make an order from like CD Japan or something, I'm going to have to get the actual CD so I can have it in like the best quality, because what it is it's Charlie Kosei with like a real jazz band and like all the instruments, and it's like the musicians are super talented. It honestly reminds me of like the Gundam song covers albums. Just like crazy good musical quality in the backing band, and it is reimagining all of these songs. It sounds like you've stepped into a jazz club in like an old noir movie, and it's a dude singing about Lupin the Third to you. It is one of my like new favorite albums. It is so cool. You've got to listen to this if you are a fan of this show.
Yeah, it is absolutely phenomenal. And it is a tragedy that the original masters are gone. But if you want to recapture some of the magic, that is a good way to do so.
One more, Sean. Can you read us Nice Guy Lupin, and then maybe we'll throw it to the Eyecatch, and then we'll come back and talk about the episodes.
Yeah, and I'll just to front load this. This is my favorite song in the show. Whenever this came on, like you cannot listen to this in the show without getting a huge smile on your face, especially because again, in those original 9 or so episodes, Lupin is very definitively not a nice man. Like, he's not a monster, but I would never categorize him as nice. And so that is an intentional contrast, I think, with the show. And so some of the bite of the song does kind of go away in the second half, where you lose that funny contrast. But anyways, this is Nice Guy Lupin, performed by Charlie Kosei and music by Takeo Yamashita. Lupin, he's a nice man, but he's cool. He uses Walther. Yeah. The machine cries, bang, bang. Yeah, he's the Lupin the Third. Nice man. Yeah, he smiles, and he gets angry, sometimes. But he's a groovy guy. Yeah, Lupin the Third. Go. Go, man. You gotta feel it. Yeah, Lupin. Yeah, Lupin. You're great. So good.
It's the Lupin, you're great. That is my favorite.
It's that, and I love the like not quite native English use of he uses Walther is just off enough. It's just off enough. It's like he uses a Walther, like you would never just lose the article there. And it's so funny. And then also he's the Lupin the Third is also, it's that kind of thing where, because it's not perfectly native English, it uses the English language better than we would. It's so good.
I love it.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
All right, Sean, let's go through and talk about the episodes. There's not that many in this show, and I just want to hit these. Some of these we won't have much to say about. Some of these we will have a lot to say about. Starting at the beginning, episode 1, Is Lupin Burning? A very James Bond episode where he has his own Spectre-style organization in Scorpion. You have Fujiko getting tied to a table like Bond and Goldfinger, and then, of course, you've got your entire, Formula 1 racing and all of that. This is, animation-wise, a fucking standout and a very striking first episode.
Yeah, this is also, with that title, this is probably the best title for the title treatment they have for episodes, which is fucking amazing in this show. Yes. They have the opening theme, they have, a little bit of, not technically, I guess, a cold opening, but, something close to where they have, the kind of intro to the episode, and then you have this cut to black, and then all the letters of the title flash on screen really quickly with a machine gun, ba 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 sound, and then you get this smash to the full title on there, and that Lupin wa moete iru ka? ... question mark exclamation point. That is the perfect title for that very stylish title treatment that they give every episode. This is a very good opening episode. It's not my favorite episode of the show. It does have, I think, probably the worst stuff in terms of that scene with Fujiko. I think is pretty frustrating when she's captured. That is one that you would not make that scene today in any context, whether this is animation or live action. But the sort of the centerpiece of the episode, which is the big race stuff, that stuff is very compelling. It's so well animated and so well constructed, and the idea of the whole plot Lupin has of having Jigen driving an identical car and finding points in the race where they can swap, and they do a whole slow motion thing to show he went off this jump while Lupin went under here, and it's freezes, and then he lands and Lupin goes off and has this whole adventure, and then they switch back on again because then he got is also racing. That stuff is fucking amazing. And that's where when you're talking about some of the storyboarding and stuff in the Osumi episodes, that's some of the sequences I think about that, God, putting that together. It's so intricate, and it's very much a set piece that you can feel you could only do that on episode 1, in terms of the amount of effort that has to go into animating all those cars and putting all that sequence together. You need that, the extra prep time in episode 1 gets for a show like this, to be able to do that, and they use that extra time very effectively, I think, there.
Yeah. Reed Nelson in the liner notes for this notes that the key animator for all of the driving stuff on the Speedway was a guy named Yuzo Aoki, who was 19 years old when they did this, which is nuts. But Yasuo Otsuka considered him a genius and thought he was the only other anime who could draw the cars in the show. And Aoki would go on and be a major part of, he was a key animator here. He was the animation co-director and mech designer on Mystery of Mamo, the first movie. He's a big, I think he's the art director on the third show and that film, and character designer and stuff all over the place. So anyway, very important animator. And yes, the car stuff is done great. This is based on a chapter of the manga called Dead Heat that is one of, I think, art-wise, the best chapters that I've seen from Monkey Punch. The way he visualizes speed is really impressive. I do actually like the manga chapter a little bit more because it does not, that one is just Lupin is stealing something. And I think the theft is really clever. And I think the thing they do here where they have the Scorpion group and the assassins, I think that this is something that I think is the weakness of some of the Osumi episodes, is the plot sometimes gets kind of convoluted and isn't all that well strung together, which is fine. That's not, these episodes are not super plot centric in the way the Miyazaki eps will be later on. But I do kind of wish the straight heist thing was in here because it's a really cool thing that Lupin is doing. And I think some of the Scorpion stuff, just because especially it's not something the show ever does again, it's a little off to me.
Yeah. I agree. That's kind of ties into some of the way they use Fujiko here feels weird, and it's and luckily she's never used quite this way again. It's a kind of a weird thing where she's made effectively a damsel in distress, which is not, I guess, like kind of episode 9 does, but not in this way.
Yeah.
So luckily they
she does get one over on Lupin in the end. She does get she sells out Lupin and Jigen at the end, and then she drives off. Although she is also, this is the other thing about Fujiko, is she has a more distinctive appearance in the early episodes, but they also cannot fucking decide on her character model, and so she is like off model for like the first half of this series. She is more on model in the Miyazaki eps, but it is a less interesting model. So I think it would take them a little while to get Fujiko's design under control. Episode 2, absolute classic. This is like one of the most well-known episodes of anime in Japanese history. The Man They Called a Magician, based on the title of the same name. The manga chapter is pretty similar. This one expands on it a little bit to get it out to 22 minutes. But, you know, Paikal, he's a magician using all these tricks. And it's fucking great.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. You know, it does the kind of classic thing of that playing with, like, is it supernatural, is it not, and Lupin having to sort of solve what is Paikal's whole deal here. This is also one that uses Fujiko really well, right, because she has this relationship with Paikal. Like, that's one of those things about the show that feels more adult early on that completely goes away when you lose the sexual dynamic. It's like the sexual unattainability of Fujiko from Lupin, is enhanced by the fact that she is willing to go with all these other men for her plots, but not for Lupin. And I think that's one of those things that makes their relationship very compelling, because she's clearly willing to use sex as a tool to manipulate people, and particularly men. And she does manipulate Lupin, but but it feels like they have never crossed that line. It feels like she has, like, I feel like it's very obviously implied that she has slept with Paikal, but it doesn't feel like she's ever actually slept with Lupin. And that's one of those things that makes that relationship, I think, very, like, electric, is that there's this line between the two of them that they have not crossed, that for whatever reason, that you do not know, like, why is she not willing to do this and go that far with Lupin.
Yeah, but Paikal is a very memorable antagonist. There's so much weird stuff here. The whole idea of this guy who has, like, bulletproof skin and all that is very creepy. He's got the finger, fire gun, and the way Lupin figures all this out in the second half is very enjoyable. I particularly like the sequence in the second half where Lupin and Jigen keep trying bigger and bigger guns against Paikal.
Yes.
All the way up to a fucking grenade launcher. And a rocket launcher, like, really stressing the limits of that fucking coating he has on his skin, which I will say, the thing of, like, throwing a grenade at him is not in the manga chapter, but they didn't, like, adjust the thing around it, so it's a little silly, but that's what you want. It's very goofy. This whole episode also has, like, a very kind of, you see this in a lot of Osumis, a very kind of new wave editing style. It kind of reminds me of, like, Jean-Luc Godard or Seijun Suzuki in Japan. You're just got a lot of kind of, like, cuts all over the place and jump cuts and things, kinds of cuts you don't usually see in animation. And it's very dynamic. This is definitely, like, the one where I think things sort of, for this initial phase of the show, snap into place.
Yes, and then also they do seemingly kill Paikal at the end, which is another one of those things that goes away. Lupin definitely stops killing people at a certain point in this show.
Lupin kills a lot of people in these first couple episodes. Like, in that episode 1 I didn't mention, he's, like, electrocuting and exploding people. They kill Paikal here. Episode 2 opens with Paikal getting fucking Tommy gunned, and it seems like he's dead because you don't know yet what's going to happen. There's definitely a lot of violence here. The best in episode 4 is when Lupin fucking hangs 5 cops at the prison. And
he says that they're just unconscious. It's fine. When you hang someone with a rope and their feet are dangling off the ground, that definitely just knocks them unconscious.
That is very much I can see their parachutes line.
Yes.
That they added in later. Episode 3 is one of the weirder episodes. It's called Farewell, My Beloved Witch. I don't even know how to describe this one. It's like it's very like hippie culture-esque with this like cult on this island and this woman who is apparently a witch, although we never see her doing magic, and she dies. It's considered one of the lesser episodes of the series, probably for good reason, but it's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. I think this was the episode that when I watched it, I'm like, oh, Dirty Pair is just like not modern, but like what was at the time in the 80s, a more modern version of this, because that feels like it's weirdly sci-fi in ways. The Dirty Pair is literally sci-fi because that's set in space in the future. And yes, it is very weirdly hippie. It's got some stuff that I like some shots that I almost wonder if they were like influential on like Tomino for Mobile Suit Gundam, of where like the lady kind of melting into the flowers and stuff. That reminds me a little bit of some of the new type stuff. Like there's some very striking visuals, but it is definitely one of the ones where the plot just kind of feels like it's just sort of there. And you can appreciate the construction of the production of it, but the story is kind of whatever.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I do think, is a difference where Osumi, this is like kind of, when you swing and a miss on this style, you'll often have these kind of disjointed plots that don't go anywhere. Whereas the Miyazaki eps that are less good do have a plot, they'll just be kind of a boring plot. It's kind of, you see a bad episode here versus a bad episode there are still kind of different. I do love the beginning of this one, which you start out with Lupin and Fujiko on a boat together. Then they find Linda, who is on a boat, and they shoot. Fujiko just starts shooting at it, explodes that boat. Then Lupin goes and gets with Linda, and then they're being chased by a giant cruiser, and then Jigen comes out from behind a rock and blows up the cruiser with a couple of shots. That is the best part of this episode. It is absolutely insane, and that's like the first 3 minutes.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is crazy. And then there's like her dad who gets shot on the helicopter, and he's like a weird, crazy, mad scientist who's like experimenting with like flower DNA and putting it in humans. It's fucking crazy.
I will say, Sean, this is something you probably did not know about Lupin coming in. There is a lot of weird sci-fi shit in Lupin from time to time. Yes. We will see that with the movie next week. You will, even in The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, in kind of embraces some of this. Sometimes just weird shit happens in the world of Lupin, and it is not, it's never grounded, but like, it's like there's a certain level of reality that then gets blown apart by there's suddenly magic in the show or something. I love it.
Yeah, and then the next week, it's like everyone just kind of forgets that happened. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Episode 4, One Chance for Escape. One of our favorites. Obviously, we've already mentioned it a lot, but this is where Lupin is in prison for an entire year, and Zenigata being just absolutely tortured by waiting for Lupin to do his thing, and it doesn't come for a full year. This is a perfect episode of television.
Yeah, this is my favorite episode of the show. I just think it is conceptually fucking genius. I love that it's just episode 4, like I said, that like they lean entirely on the archetypal nature of the characters in order to tell the story, which works great. Like it's just so efficient a way to approach this episode. But then it's just that like so much of the episode is you just sitting there being like, what is the punchline going to be? And I think they hold on it for so long that you are left to wonder, to like, does he have a plan or does he not? Yes. And there are like red herrings that are thrown around, like the Buddhist priest guy that comes to visit that eventually like Jigen disguises himself as, but you wonder like, is that part of his plan? Like because there are these recurring things that happen. You're like, is Lupin going to use that? Like, what is he doing? Why is he doing it? And the reveal that it's entirely out of spite, that he's just doing this because Zenigata captured him, and that hurt Lupin's pride. And it was like he got shot with like a non-lethal bullet or whatever, but he has this whole monologue of like, if that was real, I would have died there. And he like recognized that he truly lost. And that's one of those things where like in the Osumi episodes, you have this like darker elements to the character like that I think give it this like stronger dramatic foundation that I find really compelling. And that reveal that all of this, it's very petty, but it all boils down to this feeling of defeat that Lupin is trying to get over and try to like throw that onto Zenigata. I just think it's a very powerful, effective story that uses the kind of archetypal pieces they've got perfectly.
This is by far the most hardcore Lupin is in this whole series. Like, the whole thing of part of his plan is that he spends the whole year yelling that he's not Lupin, so they won't listen to him, when at the end, he does finally change places. They just ignore him. And, like, he almost gets an innocent guard executed until and that's how he gets Zenigata to leave him alone, is finally Zenigata is a good guy deep down. He's not going to let that happen. So Zenigata has to let Lupin go so he can go save the guard from the fucking electric chair. That is, Lupin is not a nice man in this one. He is a very bad man in this episode.
Yeah. That whole twist of the whole time he's saying this thing of like, I'm not Lupin, it's him. And Zenigata not buying it. And that coming around to being that's really what his plan is. So good. It's fuck, that episode's amazing.
Amazing. Episode 5, The Coming of Goemon, also based on a manga chapter called The Coming of Goemon. And it's one of the straighter adaptations. Like this manga chapter basically is the first half of this episode, and then they expanded on it for the second half, because none of these chapters could be a full episode. They're too short. But I do love the premise of this one, where Lupin and Jigen are just watching Goemon cut up wood at the beginning and like clapping and like, this guy's really impressive. And then they find out Goemon wants to kill Lupin, and so they have to deal with that. Fujiko is there as Goemon's girlfriend. You have some killer animation in this one. There's a big duel Goemon has in the dark that is like with all these flashing images. And then there's this big fight where they are running across traffic at the end, across cars on the freeway, and Goemon is cutting them up. That is, like, on a set piece level, one of the best things in this show. And like, for the time, I can't imagine anything had been done on TV like this. It's wild.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then, like we said earlier, the use of Goemon as an adversary for Lupin is really compelling. It's like, it's the thing that makes this whole episode work. And it is like, it's frustrating because it does feel like it's a dynamic that is repeatable. And then they just kind of, obviously they sort of reuse it a bit for episode 7, and then it goes away. And you're like, God, you had some magic here of, I think they're so good, like, against each other. Why make him an ally? I will never quite understand.
Yeah. We also learn about Goemon's sword here, Zantetsuken, which I think in the West, and I know this because I was just Googling it, you will get all the Final Fantasy references, but Final Fantasy took that from Lupin.
Yes.
So in Japan, people would know Zantetsuken as a Lupin reference. Here, I think people think of it as a Final Fantasy thing, but that is backwards. And I do love that Zantetsuken was made by melting down like the 3 legendary swords of Japanese folklore. It's such a cool little detail. One of my favorite things about Goemon.
Also, not a way to make like a really good sword. I don't think that would help you out very much. I think you just make a way worse sword if you took swords made centuries apart, melted them down, and tried to use the metal to forge them together. I don't think that would help you out very much.
Probably not. So yes, episode 6, Rainy Afternoons Are Dangerous. And this is where they are, it's kind of one of our first actual heist episodes where they are trying to get the star of Kilimanjaro, this diamond. And it's not the most notable one of this period, but I do like this one quite a bit.
Yeah, this is the one with like the mob boss who has like lost his memory or whatever, and all that shit. Yes, this is one where like Fujiko definitely like is very effective, and they've got like all these like kind of fun background characters, like what is his name, like Tatsu or something, the dragon.
Yes.
Yeah, I loved all that shit.
Fujiko gets the diamond back in such a stupid, simple way at the end of this one, where she is like, hey guys, look over there. And then Dragon, who is working for Fujiko, just tosses her the diamond and she runs away. And then Jigen kills him for it. Because this is dark, and she just shoots that fucking guy. It's you definitely feel like, oh, this is the last one before things started to change, and it does end with one of the most violent moments in the series, which is great.
Hey,
you don't usually see. Yeah,
they're fucking criminals, man. Like, it's like, hey, you fucking you betrayed us on the job. Like, you're gonna get shot. Like, what else did the dragon expect, man? This is also one where they do a weird thing with the translation, which I at least appreciate that they put this in the liner notes, of where there's like an intersection that is shaped like a manji, which is what we would recognize in the West probably more likely as a swastika in terms of the shape of it. And they translate it as a swastika in the subtitles, and I'm like, why would you do that? Like, why not just call it manji and then put in a subtitle note of like, it is a traditional Buddhist symbol. And that's like, it's not a fucking swastika. Like, they're shaped similarly, but that's not what it is.
This annoys me in a lot of stuff where, like, the manji is something you see in a lot of manga and anime because it is a Buddhist symbol and it's a cultural thing. It is not Buddhism's fault that Hitler made this horrible symbol that looks like it. And it does annoy me when, like, stuff in the West will take the manji and, like, edit it out or act like it's bad. Like, again, this is a symbol that predates the fucking swastika by centuries, you know? This was a whole thing. There's a character in One Piece who has a manji on him that they started editing out in like Western stuff and stopped using in the manga because it's controversial. And on one level, I do get it, but like you can explain it with an asterisk and a note. It's not hard.
Yes, and then at the very least in the subtitles, there's no reason to call it a swastika. It's like nobody's going to be confused when they see what the road looks like and be like, oh, well, I don't understand what a manji is, and I cannot comprehend what the shot of the road is telling me that the shape of this intersection. Most of the translation is very good. That is just one that I just don't understand that choice of why you translated it as swastika.
Yeah. Episode 7, One Wolf Calls Another, is another Goemon episode. It is the first one where we stop having directorial credits, but this is still basically an Osumi episode. A Productions would not have had a ton of influence yet. This is also the first of a common Lupin trope, which is you're dealing with Lupin's family legacy a little bit, and talking about like his grandpa and his dad and those sorts of things. Yeah, and there's some good stuff in this one. There's also some fairly graphic violence. There's a moment where Goemon basically cuts a dude in half. Yes, that's a good shot. You do see Lupin the Second in this one, which would be Lupin the Third's dad. And I love the Lupin the Second design because it's just Lupin the Third with a monocle, a goatee, and a top hat. And I do kind of like they just look the same. Lupin the Second is just a little more extra, which is great.
He just grew that beard out. Yeah, this one also I love. I believe this is the one that has like basically the plot of Enter the Dragon, that Lupin, where they're all these like martial artists going to meet. And Lupin like beats up and disguises himself as one of them along the way, and Fujiko's disguised as one of them. And I love that it's just like they're all there, and it's different martial artists of different styles fighting in order to like train under this master or whatever.
Yes, and this one ends with Goemon sort of unofficially becoming part of the gang after he cuts Lupin's car in half, which is a really great shot. And you have Lupin driving away with half his car. And you don't see his yellow car much after this point. He starts driving, and this is Miyazaki's influence. Miyazaki puts him in more of like a Citroen and stuff like that. And because apparently that's the car Miyazaki actually had. It's kind of a jalopy. And I do kind of like the continuity that, well, Goemon cut it in half because he's crazy.
Yeah, so. But that shot of, where Lupin, because Lupin got the one up on Goemon with like the whole, like tricking him with into falling into a whole thing. And then Goemon waits for him on a bridge. Lupin sees him. Lupin fucking accelerates to try to run over Goemon. Goemon cuts the car in half. And then, you have a total Looney Tunes sequence of where Goemon is running away and Lupin is basically chasing after him in a like half car that's vertically cut in half. It's a really amazing sequence. And then they both start laughing as they're chasing each other. It's great.
Yes. So episode 8 is called The Gang's All Here Playing Card Strategy. I think this one suffers from some of the like production turnover, but I like a lot of pieces about it. This is where you start to get some of the Miyazaki touches. He liked bringing in sort of the thing that is in the Maurice LeBlanc stories of Lupin announcing his crimes, which Monkey Punch didn't use a bunch. But you start to get that here, where Lupin will announce his crime, and then Zenigata will arrive on the scene, and then Lupin and the gang will go to work. That is kind of the format that a lot of later stuff in this show and future shows will do. You have here Mr. Gold as the villain, who has his Napoleon cards, and there's this whole bit of history about these cards that gave Napoleon good luck until he lost them, and that's why Napoleon lost in Russia, is the whole explanation. And so they are trying to get the cards together. There are a lot of good scenes in here. It is very much, you can see that some of the, like, they kind of had to piece this one together because this one uses the ending sequence from the pilot where Lupin gets the gang out of this house that they are holed up in by sending this kite in and then driving away with them all on the kite. And it does kind of feel like they had to kind of cobble this one together a little bit. And there's some pretty funky animation along the way.
Yeah, I remember feeling like this was the first episode where I was like, that one was okay. Even the weird hippie episode was weird, but I was like still into it. This was, because it's also like, this is the first straight, this is a heist episode. The one with the dragon, Tatsu, The Rainy Afternoons Are Dangerous, episode 6, that one is pretty much a heist episode, but it's still like kind of off kilter enough. Whereas this is a very classic, we got all the gang here, you send the calling card in like Arsène Lupin, you pull off the heist, all that kind of stuff, you get the big crazy getaway at the end. And I was like, that was where I was like, okay, we're starting to lose the weird older version of Lupin. You're starting to kind of shift away from it. But it's not totally shifted away yet.
No, and this is also, I will just note, because I have a lot of these notes, this is the first episode where you see something that Miyazaki will later reuse in the Castle of Cagliostro, which is this moment where the clock strikes midnight and the lights all go out and Lupin, his laugh kind of booms throughout the room. Very famously a big scene in Cagliostro, and just about every episode Miyazaki works on from this point on has something he will later use in Cagliostro, so I will note those as we go along.
Yeah, as someone who has not seen that movie, I found it hilarious when I read through the liner notes that it was like every single episode in the back half of the show, there was one of the liner notes was, yeah, he used this again in Cagliostro. I'm like, what the fuck is that movie? It's like, it's just,
you'll see.
yeah. I'm very excited to watch it, but it is funny not having seen it, see all the times that they're like, yeah, and he does this in Cagliostro as well. It's like, what the fuck is the plot of that film then?
You will see. It's great. Episode 9 is the last one fully overseen by Osumi. A hitman sings the blues. We've already mentioned this one being the one about Fujiko, having had this backstory with Poon and them both being assassins. And this to me is, this and episode 14 are my two favorites. I think this one is just a directorial masterwork. Mm-hmm. So many amazing shots. There's this long kind of lyrical flashback of Poon's where he and Fujiko are running through this sort of like liminal space, and it's intercut with these still detailed images of their adventures. It's so amazing. There's these very adventurous shots throughout. Like this one where you kind of go through, there's the whole thing where Lupin is sending these big stalks of bamboo into the house, so eventually to trick them into letting him come in and get Fujiko. But there's one where the bamboo gets shot and the camera just goes with the bamboo across the field into the house. I don't even know how they animated that. It's wild.
Yeah, it's an amazing episode. I love all the episodes. It's like this, it's the Magician episode, and it's the episode 14 with Catherine, where you have, there aren't many episodes like that where you've got a guest character that really stands out and is really memorable, you know, and like Poon is one of those where like you remember that character. He's got a great design. It's a really good performance. It's a great plot. And I think it's one of those things that really makes that episode stand out, is how much it feels like it's an episode just as much about him as it is any of our main characters, and everything that it says about Fujiko and then her relationship with Lupin. Which we've kind of talked about when we talked about Fujiko, is just really fascinating. I do love that he has, so Lupin has his crazy bamboo makeshift crossbow, and they do bring this concept back, only in the most extra way possible in a later episode, where it's the same idea, but he launches an entire tree that has been uprooted and impales a fucking helicopter with it. If there's anything that says about like how kind of more cartoonish the show has become in its back half, that is it to me. He goes from doing this thing that's like fairly silly, where he launches the medical supplies in this makeshift crossbow with big bamboo things. He goes from that to impaling a fucking helicopter by uprooting an entire giant tree. It's like, oh my god. I was fascinated when they brought that idea back, but just dialed it up to fucking like 50.
I love it. It's great. The ending of this one is also just the most perfect noir movie ending, where you have Lupin is carrying Fujiko away, Poon is going to shoot, Fujiko fires from Lupin's arms and kills him. And then Jigen walks in after they're gone, and Poon is like bleeding out on the floor, and Jigen does this little tip of the hat to Poon. Great moment. Then you have this hard cut to this big rave dance where Lupin and Fujiko are dancing with like all these hippies and flashing lights. It's kind of a recreation of that moment from the pilot where Fujiko is doing this kind of like club dance. But then you find out it wasn't Lupin because he's knocked out. Not knocked up. He's tied up and knocked out in bed somewhere, and Fujiko was off with someone a fake Lupin or something. And then I
thought the implication of that scene was they went clubbing, and then instead of them sleeping with each other, her knocking Lupin out when he thought, okay, now I'll finally be able to be with her. Okay. And then then she leaves and she stands on the harbor where Poon originally showed up at the beginning of the episode, looking out over the sea. Yeah.
Okay, I was doing it from memory there a little bit. No, you're right. There are other episodes where she does that to Lupin, where she knocks him out and like has someone impersonate him. But anyway, this one's a masterpiece. I think it's just an extraordinary feat of direction.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's like that and episode 4, I think, are two of the best episodes in the whole show, obviously, but also those are the two best Osumi episodes to me.
Yeah. Episode 10, Target the Cash Counterfeiter, which Reed Nelson notes is kind of the first one that you really have Miyazaki and Takahata overtaking the influence of Osumi. And you know that because the first scene of this episode is Lupin and Jigen flying in a plane that looks exactly like a Miyazaki drawing of a plane,
Yes.
which is
and
great.
then also there's like a big climactic sequence where they're fighting in a giant clock.
Yep.
Which is a very Miyazaki fucking thing. I believe that was one of the things they said that is also in Cagliostro, and I was like, you don't need to tell me that he's going to use that again because I've not seen it, but that is like the most Miyazaki Ghibli ass fucking like action sequence in this whole show.
I mean, it's probably the most famous action scene in Cagliostro, and you know that because Disney stole it in The Great Mouse Detective and some other stuff. I mean, Cagliostro is interesting because that movie has been like basically stripped for parts by the global animation industry. It's so influential. I mean, Spielberg was influenced by it for Raiders. I mean, that movie has had such an influence. And so you go back to part one where Miyazaki is like testing these ideas, and you see moments that like their ripples in pop culture are going to be massive and transnational. That's not even the only Cagliostro bit in this one. The whole counterfeiting plot is similar to the plot of Cagliostro, which involves money counterfeiting and some of that. Fujiko is in a red plane here that is basically Porco Rosso's plane from Porco Rosso. There's just a lot of fun stuff here, and you have this. You do have a more hard-nosed ending though, where you have the Ukraine fox, the like silver-haired old woman, and the blonde guy shooting each other, which frees Ivanov, the counterfeiter, from his counterfeiting life, and it's a very noir-y ending. But I like this one. I think it's solid.
Yeah, it's good. It definitely is like one where you can feel the shift happening, and it's like I think it's probably for me the most interesting one that feels like it's got its foot in both camps because you can feel a lot of the Osumi influence, as say with like it's still more violent, it's darker, but you see Miyazaki's hand all over the place in this fucking thing, and so it's a pretty interesting kind of chimera of an episode.
Yep. 11 is When the Seventh Bridge Falls, another one that is mainly Miyazaki. Lupin is being framed for blowing up these bridges all over town. And this is the one where I really started to realize that the way Miyazaki and Takahata are taking the show is much more in that kind of procedural sense where you kind of get... Like, you know, Osumi's episodes are big and madcap and kind of take these big leaps, and Miyazaki kind of likes to show you every step along the way of the heist and kind of see the fun is kind of how are they going to do all the steps in the plan, and this is one that I think does that well and kind of shows you how they're building that up. This also has a great moment at the end where Lupin is surfing behind the boat with his handcuffs on, and he's shooting the pistol by cocking it with his mouth, and they use this thing on the soundtrack that is that track where they have the spaghetti western whistling. That is a very good climax.
Yes, yeah, that's a great climax. This is a very fun episode. This is also the first one where you get more of like Lupin the hero because he's like rescuing this girl. But I think it's interesting that it's not as far as the Horse Girl episode. I forget what the title of it is, but it has Uma Musume.
The Tomboy episode,
yes,
is how they translated it on this set. Yeah,
I like Uma Musume because that is now the very popular gacha franchise of where they take actual historical racehorses in Japan but make them anime girls, and it's called Uma Musume, which literally means horse girl. So I think it is the Uma Musume episode. But anyways, in that episode,
girl used in a slightly different sense than it's used with like My Little Pony fandom, but yes. Yeah.
But anyways, in that episode, he's very heroic. Like there's kind of nothing like complicated about his heroism. In here, it feels more like he is heroic, but he's also been kind of pushed into this position. And so I think that there's something interesting there about the transition of where he still feels a little bit more like the not literally a nice guy Lupin, before he becomes, yes, this is just straight up a nice guy Lupin by the end of the show.
Yeah. Episode 12 is still we're uncredited, but Reed Nelson says this one has more of Osumi in it, and I think you can tell. This is one where Fujiko this is a really cool one setting-wise, because they're in these snowy mountains in this village, and there's this village elder who has these two statues, and one of them, between the two of them, they have this treasure map that Fujiko is trying to get, and she and Lupin are kind of racing for it. And so you kind of have a balance between some goofiness and still some of that harder-edged violence. There's some drinking in this one. Lupin and Jigen wind up leveling an entire village with their guns at the end of this one.
They have a fucking mortar on a hill that they just start blowing up the whole village, which is like pretty fucking extreme.
It's a pretty brutal ending, too, because the villain at the end of this one chooses to blow himself up and die rather than admit defeat to Lupin and Jigen. So it's a very brutal ending. And Fujiko gets jerked around by everyone in this episode and then wins by getting the treasure map from the statue while everyone else is faffing about.
Yeah.
Although then there's an extra... I love Lupin episodes that end with like 5 twists, because this one has an extra twist where the old man who like was really being jerked around actually had already swapped the treasure maps, and he grabbed all the money everyone had brought to pay for the little statues. So he has the treasure maps and all this money, and everyone else is fucked. This is actually a really solid one. I like this one.
Yeah, it's like not the best episode, but it's very solid. But the main thing I remember about it is just how fucking gorgeous the backgrounds look. Oh my god, the backgrounds of the snowy mountain and the trees and stuff. It's just some of the best backgrounds you'll see in any TV anime. It's gorgeous.
And that's where I think you can feel some of the Takahata, like, pastoral settings that he likes to... Takahata is not an animator himself, but you can tell, like, I can feel his hand as a director telling, like, let's make this look pretty, because this is a very kind of, that kind of pastoral sense. It's snow pastoral, but still it's that kind of ideal thing. You have some very cool, like, James Bond action at the beginning with Fujiko in the snow that feels... I mean, this is... 71 we would have had on Her Majesty's Secret Service at this point. So this is when we start having the tradition of James Bond snow sequences. So I can kind of feel that influence here as well, which I like.
Yeah, a very fun one.
Yeah. Episode 13 is the weirdest episode of this entire series.
Yeah.
And it is one of my favorites. It is called Beware the Time Machine. And it involves a character named Mamo. Not the same Mamo as the movie we're going to watch next week, The Mystery of Mamo. They reused the name...
I was very surprised when I looked at the liner notes, because I just assumed, they're going to bring this guy back, because I knew what the name of the movie was. No. I was like, I guess not. I guess they just thought Mamo was a great name for a bad guy.
Yep, but it is Kyosuke Mamo, who has a time machine, and he is going around and he is trying to get revenge against Lupin the 13th from the year 2817, because he has seen the future and he knows that Lupin the 13th is going to fuck over his family. Mamo himself was born in 1932, but can see throughout time. I love there's this line where they've researched him, and I think it's Jigen who says, apparently he's a sci-fi writer and Hugo Award winner. Which, that has to be the only time in the history of fiction that the villain's resume has included the phrase Hugo Award winner. So it's basically if George R.R. Martin went crazy, is what Kyosuke Mamo is.
Yeah, this episode is very weird, because I feel like I almost kind of want to rewatch it, because I watched the whole episode convinced that the twist at the end was that he doesn't have an actual time machine, because there's like some goofy stuff that happens in Lupin, but there is nothing else in this show, at least in part 1, that is anywhere near the level of... There is an author from the early 20th century who's a sci-fi author who created a time machine that allowed him to go to the future, where he sees that his distant descendants will be killed by Lupin's distant descendants, so he decides to go back in time to kill Lupin. Like, that is so fucking harebrained and insane a plot that I was like, well, obviously the end of this is going to be the twist is that it's not actually a time machine. And no, it's a fucking time machine. Like, there's nothing in here that indicates in any way, shape, or form that he did not literally do this. He doesn't literally have a time machine. Like, when he erases people, he has actually gone back in time and killed the person's ancestor or something to erase them. It is not like a trick. And I was like, it would be like if the magician episode at the end, the twist was, no, he literally can just shoot fire and he can literally fly, and that's it. And I have to admit, I didn't like this episode that much because it just totally broke the whole style and world of Lupin the Third to me in a way I couldn't quite reconcile.
Come back to it later on, Sean, because I just could tell you, This is a signature of Lupin III, is once in a while, it loses its goddamn mind. And the Mystery of Mamo movie has no relation to this, except that movie loses its goddamn mind at the end, and also does something similar to this. And I will just say, that is a tradition, is that once in a while, you have a Lupin episode where something impossible happens, and it makes no sense, and it's, I don't know, you just roll with it, because it's fun. I love this one. It is so silly, but it's got, it is beautifully animated. This is one that Osamu Dezaki did the storyboards on, and he's one of the greats of anime history. And I really love the boarding on this one. In fact, the first scene of this is Lupin driving down the highway, and he gets stopped by Mamo, and it is one of the best boarded sequences in this whole show. Just the shots of his car stopping and these cutaways to the edge of the road, and it is just really, really strikingly directed. I love the whole plot at the end where the way they catch Mamo is they tell him to go back and find Lupin's Japanese ancestor, and then they just recreate the Japanese countryside to trick him, and then they just get fucking hammers out and just start beating the time machine to death. It's so out there. I don't know. I love it. It's crazy.
I think it would be an amazing episode, one of the best episodes of the show for me, if at the end, the twist was they convince Mamo that he actually traveled in time, when that's not what Mamo's been doing. He's been tricking them, right? That's what I thought the end was going to be, because that makes sense to me. It's he goes into the time machine, is going to make it disappear or whatever. But all of it is fake, right? The whole time, because there's also a scene earlier where Lupin, he's been depressed for the whole episode because he thinks he's going to die. And then there's a scene where he mysteriously disappears. And everyone thinks, oh my God, did he die? And Lupin's actually there. And I thought, okay, he figured out the trick of how Mamo is causing these things that seem to be impossible to happen, in the same way he did that with Pykel and the crazy fucking body thing that creates the thing that makes your skin temporarily invulnerable, which obviously that is also crazy, but is more plausible than this guy just uses magic, right? That's a scale of implausibility you're dealing with there. And so I thought that, okay, he's figured out the trick, so he knows, okay, this guy isn't actually traveling in time, so let's trick him into thinking, oh, somehow he has actually traveled backwards in time, instead of faking it. And that would be a cool twist to the end of the episode and reveal what has Mama been doing the whole time. And instead it's just no, he was just time traveling, and then we beat him up and then it's over. You kind of gave up on the plot there at the finish line. You had a great episode going, and then you just thought, yeah, this is good enough, and you just stopped. It's kind of what it felt like.
My very strong suspicion is that was the story at some point between pitch, scripting, storyboarding, and in some of all of the production haze of this period of the show, which was very hectic, it got cut or dropped or something, because it is so teed up to do that, and it is really weird that it's not there, and it feels like it's supposed to be there. So that is my suspicion, but we will probably never know.
I would love to see somebody edit the Magician episode together, to have the ending of the episode be Lupin wins because he also learns how to do magic and just beats Pykel in a magic fight, and you cut out or change all the dialogue that actually explains what happened. That literally would be what episode 13 is. And to me, again, I think I need to rewatch it, because I think I would be able to come away from it feeling better about the episode if I knew going in, this is what it's going to do, and I could appreciate, because when you talk about how good the direction is, I'm remembering, right, yeah, it did have all these great scenes. It's got that great scene with the aquarium or whatever in Lupin's hideout when he's depressed. It's got so many great shots and sequences, but the ending of it left this, I don't even know if I was a bad taste. It just left a kind of incomprehensible taste in my mouth, or well, what the fuck just happened? And the episode was over, and then I went to bed. And yeah, I just found it very perplexing.
Yeah. I do also love any episode where you get kind of a depressed, shiftless Lupin who's kind of, he can't figure out how to win. And in this one, there's a very funny scene where he's acting like he's going to die, and he gives his friends, Jigen and Gomon, his P-38 to remember him by.
Yes.
I fucking loved that. This is a great moment. Episode 14, masterpiece, The Emerald Secret. Classic setup. There's a cruise ship, there's a wedding, there's a big jewel. Lupin sends a note. Fujiko is already there infiltrating, and Zenigata is there knowing Lupin's going to come. You only have a little Jigen and Goemon here, but it's very funny. It is they help Lupin get smuggled in via the cake, and they are dressed as bakers, which is a great little note. You have that amazing moment where Zenigata just starts stabbing the cake wildly to try to find Lupin, and he's all disheveled inside afterwards. But man, this is, I think, the best example of the sort of Miyazaki version of Lupin in this series, where it is this rock-solid caper. It hits that procedural quality so well. This is not the same Fujiko-Lupin dynamic as the earlier episodes, but it is still a very compelling one where they are basically rivals. And, of course, Zenigata caught up in the middle between Fujiko, Catherine, and Lupin, and Catherine herself, the woman who has the jewel, is being duplicitous in her own way. This one is ludicrously fun.
Yeah, it is like basically the ideal of the Miyazaki vision of the show. And it's like it's both good and bad in some ways, I guess, that it is the first one that is that, because it's like none of the episodes after this to me reach like the heights of this episode. Not to say that the other ones aren't good. They are, but this one is like so unbelievably good. I just remember being completely fucking floored by it when I first watched it. And it's such as the definitive statement for this different vision of what the show is, that it does just sort of snap into focus some of what you've been seeing in this middle stretch of episodes, where you're getting a little bit more of the heisty stuff, like the episode 11 when the seventh bridge falls, or Who Had the Last Laugh, and like the Target the Cash Counterfeiter episode 10. All of those are like, you're feeling the Miyazaki, you're feeling like the formulaic heist stuff starting to come in, but it's not fully shaped yet. And then episode 14 lands, you're like, oh, okay, this is what the show is going to be now. And it works great, and it is the best use of Fujiko in that vision of the show by far. This is also where they are able to sort of justify her character redesign with the shorter hair in a way that works because she's disguised as a maid, so her looking a lot more kind of plain works really well. Unfortunately, like, there's no reason for her to look incredibly plain and normal for the rest of the show, so it's like that usage doesn't have any effect anywhere else. But for this one episode, it's a really strong choice to change her character design up. I mean, so much so that I didn't know that it was a permanent character redesign. I thought it was just for this one episode, right, until you got to the later ones.
This is also the episode that gives us an amazing piece of Lupin ongoing lore and history, which is Lupin calling Zenigata Pops, or Totchan, which he is not in the manga, and it's not in the earlier episodes, but this is where Lupin starts using it, and it is obviously a classic piece of the Lupin experience. Zenigata is great here, and there is that scene that Miyazaki drew himself, where Fujiko does this big exaggerated dance with Zenigata on the floor to trick him. That is one of my favorite pieces of animation in this show, and that's saying something. Yeah,
well, there's this whole, like, elongated sequence of, like, the dance is happening, them trading off partners to buy time while Lupin and or Fujiko are trying to investigate. It's great. And then, like we said earlier with, like, Paikol and Poon, Catherine is the other big supporting character in an episode that, like, kind of owns that episode. And it makes a lot of sense that the actress is then the one who plays Fujiko later and played her in the pilot, because it is a really strong performance. It's a really strong character, and the twist at the end that it was like the cat's the jewel was one of the cat's eyes is really, really great. It's also like a slightly gruesome, but they don't lean on it too much about the fact that they had to, like, don't think too much about that they had to dig the jewel out of the cat's fucking eye socket.
But this is what I love, is Lupin does that, but then the reveal is that he gave the cat this badass eye patch.
Yes.
So, like, the cat looks cool as shit. It's got a fucking eye patch now. I love it.
Yeah, because you also don't want to think too much about at what point did Catherine have the idea. Like, did she... The question this episode doesn't answer. Was that already a one-eyed cat? Or did somebody / her gouge out one of that cat's fucking eyeballs in order to replace it with a jewel? That's a question we do not know.
This episode also inaugurates something that you will get through the rest of the series, where the ending is like the big, if it is a triumphant ending, not every episode is Lupin wins, but this one is. And as Lupin and Fujiko fly away, the insert song comes in and you just get this explosion of P-38, Walther, as they're flying away. And every time that would happen in this half of the show, I would just, like, clap. It's so fun when you have the big, like, Ghibli moment of him flying away, but with that bluesy, just, like, triumphant song. Oh, it's great.
Yeah, it's really good. And then, like we said earlier, like that shot in that sequence is so good of him with Fujiko and the glider that they then use it from that point on when they switch the theme song over to at the very end of the theme song, because it's just such a distinctive shot, and it is the most Miyazaki shot in this whole show.
Yep. Episode 15, they were really on a roll here, because this one is also great. Let's Catch Lupin and Go to Europe. Maybe the best episode title in this series. Where you have the World Police Conference in Europe. I don't think that's an actual thing, but okay. And Zenigata doesn't want to go until he captures Lupin. Lupin and the gang are trying to get this golden bust. He does capture Lupin, and he even gets this signed letter from the Prime Minister, and he's in the papers and everything. And then Lupin gets one over on him. It is so brutal. This is one of the best poor guy Zenigata episodes. You feel for that poor man by the end.
Yeah, this is my favorite Zenigata episode for sure. The whole like setup at the end of him, of all the ridiculous like accolades he's getting, and everybody's shaking his hand and congratulating him. As you say, like his face is in the paper and everything. And he's got his like fancy hat or whatever that he's going to wear, and he's like, I'm going to go to the World Police Conference. And then one of my favorite shots is as the plane is driving by, he looks out the window, and there's this incredible shot of all the Lupin gang, and then Lupin is sitting like on the rail, like with his legs crossed, and it's so good. It's the most like super relaxed, confident Lupin pose. And Zenigata sees it, and he freaks out, and he's just like, I gotta get off this plane. And the plane's starting to take off, and he's like rolling backwards because, he needs to sit down with his seatbelt on. It's fucking great. Yeah, it is probably like my favorite episode featuring that like specific kind of cartoonish Saturday morning cartoon dynamic between Lupin and Zenigata, because of how much fun it has with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Episode 16, now we are in the period of the show where you have the new theme song, and Miyazaki and Takahata, under the A Productions pseudonym, are being credited. The first time with this new theme song, though, they have Zenigata doing the narration, and that never happens again. And it is it's enjoyable. Goro Naya doing that narration is fun, but it is kind of weird. And the song is so fun and jazzy that I kind of think it's weird to try to cover it up with narration, but yeah.
Yes, yeah, I remember it's, as I say, this show has a bit of an identity crisis for how it uses its opening themes.
I like this one. This one's a little messier than the last couple, but it's called Operation Jewelry Snatch. And this is the one where they do this robbery of this jewelry store with this big fucking industrial vacuum that they're sucking up all the jewels with. And then they try to escape. This is another one where Fujiko is double-crossing Lupin, and you have all of this stuff. She is in another red Miyazaki seaplane. Just another Porco Rosso seaplane. There's a lot of fun scenes here. There's also this whole thing where they get all the jewels in the car, and then they're driving away, and they escape with this Italian Job-style Mini Cooper out of the back of the big truck. And, of course, you have, as soon as they drive out, you get P-38, Walther, and it's really fun. Yeah, and then it gets a little weird at the end. It kind of goes on a little too long, I think. Although there is this whole thing where they are in this cabin and they try to escape by like tying the cabin to this rope and pulley system. It's very silly, but it's fun.
Yeah, I think this is like one of the ones where it's enjoyable, but you definitely feel the like, okay, we are very much in a heist of the week formulaic thing where like the plot needed probably 2 to 3 more elements in it to actually extend out properly to the full length of the episode. Yes. And instead it's just like, let's have a couple more chase sequences. And I think that's like when the second half of the show is weaker, like that's kind of like the form that it takes. Whereas in the first half, when it's weaker, it's kind of like that episode 3 or whatever, where it's just kind of like, this is sort of doesn't know what it's doing. It's fucking crazy, and it's a big swing, but it doesn't sort of congeal. Here, it's more like, well, everything works fine, but like it is lacking that kind of dramatic punch that even on the weaker episodes, the Osumi episodes always had a stronger dramatic punch that kind of underscored everything. And here, it's like it really needs something like that, and it's just kind of missing it.
Yes. There are a couple of moments I love. You do have a moment at the end where the police have failed and Zenigata just starts free climbing the fucking mountain to get up to Lupin. That's a great Zenigata moment. Mm-hmm. And then this is where the first time we get his little catchphrase he has in this series, I'll catch you next week, our little fourth wall break. This is the first time we get that.
Same Lupin time, same Lupin channel.
You do in the next episode previews, which they stopped doing near the end, I presume because the production was crazy. You do have Yamada always saying like, the channel, which is a little bit like that. I like that. All right, episode 17, Lupin caught in a trap. This is a fun one where Fujiko has invited everyone to a club to hang out. Quote, since we're always messing with each other's heads, I feel like they should have been a little smarter about this because, of course, she fucks with them. There is a great Goemon dynamic here, though, where Goemon is invited, gets there, and is like, this is stupid, and leaves, and is then free to help them later on. Because what happens is this woman, I forget her name in this episode. It's Ginkgo is the villain,
right.
Ties them up and puts these bombs on their wrists, these time bombs that they can't cut off or they'll blow up. And they have 24 hours to get 3 billion yen together to pay her off. And I like this one because what you get is this big robbery plan that Lupin had started to do, but he never finished. And so they are improvising this plan to go to the Japanese mint, basically, and print themselves 3 billion yen. I think they should have called this one The Gang Inflates the Yen, because they do make 3 billion more yen, which is a lot. And I like this one a lot. It's fun to see them kind of improvising this plan. Yasuo Yamada is really funny in this one because Lupin is like despairing over possibly dying because they keep failing. They're running around with these comically large bags of money near the end. And yeah, so it's fun. And then of course at the end you find out that Ginkgo and Fujiko were working together. And then we also find out that Lupin printed the bills with his own face on them, so they're not worth anything anyway. That's a good ending.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that with that Operation Jewelry Snatch, it needed something like that, where it's like, okay, it's got an additional twist at the end that kind of really ties everything together. Yeah, because I think this is a fun episode. It's not like my favorite, but it's definitely a better example than episode 16 of like having that kind of formulaic high structure, but with enough of a unique twist to it and enough plot to like extend it out to the full like 23-minute runtime. Like this is a good example of like a really solid episode.
Episode 18 slaps. This one is called Keep an Eye on the Beauty Contest, and this to me has the cleverest plot of any of these, which is that there is this, at the beginning you have Lupin and Jigen spotting this plane where there are these beautiful women getting off. There's this guy they know to be a famous art thief who has stolen all these paintings, and there are a bunch of rich people, and they figure out that what they're doing is they're holding this beauty contest where all the rich people are pretending to be the judges, but what they're actually doing is bidding on these stolen paintings, which apparently include the fucking Mona Lisa. And every woman is associated with a different painting, and so they have an alibi because they're doing this contest, but this is how they're going to move the art. It's actually kind of ingenious. And then Lupin and the whole gang get in there through the camera crew. This will be reused in Cagliostro. And you have all this stuff they do to try to find the art and get it themselves, including this amazing sequence where Goemon jumps out of a big yellow Miyazaki plane, starts cutting shit up. Lupin and Jigen are filming it. Then they go back through the film to try to figure out where are the paintings. And it all ends with them getting the paintings and tying them all together into the sail of their ship just to fucking piss off all the rich people. And they sail away with the Mona Lisa sewn on their sail. This is one of my like top 10. I love this episode. It's
really good. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best heist episodes. As you say, like the plot is really interesting. It feels like they thought through it's too complicated to probably work in real life, but it sort of passes the sniff test of like, okay, that's clever. And then the ways in which it starts to unravel for the bad guys at the end of where Lupin, like, there's the whole thing of where they get on the boat and there's two boats and they kind of divert one of them away to be like, oh, we're going to do a photo shoot with the girls. And then the whole twist at the end is that, what they think is all the art in the painting and stuff in the suitcases is actually all the models that have been put in there. And so when they open it up, all like the beauty contest models like come out and they're like, tied up or whatever, as Lupin and everyone gets away because they actually stole the paintings. Like, it's just a great twist. And Zenigata is there. It's a great use of Zenigata for the formula of where they use him to try to catch the other thieves that they're working against, which is a good like kind of plot structure that I think in some of these heist episodes, it adds that extra level of complexity to it that makes it so it like keeps you really invested for the full runtime. Yeah, it's just super solid. It's a great episode.
Well, and the detail you didn't quite explain there that I love is that they specifically, Lupin put the girls in the suitcases so that it would look like the art thieves are doing this horrible human trafficking deal.
Right.
And even Zenigata is horrified and says, Lupin would never do anything like this. You're sullying his name. Like, Zenigata is insulted on Lupin's behalf, which is fucking great.
Yeah, it's amazing, yes. And then the touch of, like, apparently in the world of Lupin III, the Mona Lisa has been sewn into the sail of this boat. Like, I love that it's the Mona Lisa. That's so fucking extra that they went that far.
Oh, I love it. All right. 19, I think, is on a similar par. Which third generation will win? This is where you have Inspector Ganimard III. Inspector Ganimard is the inspector in the original Arsène Lupin stories, and he has come to catch Lupin III. Zenigata, there's this great shot at the beginning where Zenigata is at home alone, eating rice, sitting on the floor watching TV, hearing Ganimard, like, make fun of him, and I just go, oh, poor Pops. He's better than this. And the whole plot is that there's this France fair going on where they have items on display from Arsène Lupin I to try to get Lupin III to come in and steal them. And it's just a really fun heist where you have both Zenigata and Ganimard, and they're kind of swapping to see who can get Lupin first. Both of them lose to him at different points. And then, of course, it all culminates in one of the most famous sequences from this show where Lupin and Fujiko and everyone get all these students to dress up as Lupin and just flood the zone. Mm-hmm. And so you have Lupins in their green suit jackets and yellow ties everywhere. Everyone's getting arrested. It's all crazy. And then Lupin gets his prize and goes home, and they're driving down into the sunset with the Arsène Lupin, like, model out of the sunroof like he's a fucking scarecrow. This is a great one.
Yes, that climax in particular is phenomenal and is incredibly memorable. They just have so much fun with the incredibly surreal scenario of just having a million fucking Lupins all over the place. And there's just, like, some great mind-bending shots of, like, they're all on, like, escalators, and almost looks like an MC Escher shot, right? Because they're all, like, going up at these weird angles and stuff in the shot. They just, like, really go to town in that whole sequence. It just feels like, when you talk about, you know, sometimes there are places where you just feel how much fun the animators are having. That is a really great example of a sequence where it feels like everybody involved in that must have had a fucking blast coming up with how do you sell and, like, sort of really use this sequence to its fullest, because it's fucking great.
It's so good. There's also a moment that is, like, a pretty, like, piercing political joke where Fujiko, when she's interviewing this room full of students who we know later on she's going to be using as the, like, Lupin clones, she says, hey, has anyone here ever been in a brawl with riot police before? And they all raise their hand. Yeah. That is... oh my God, because the point there is that this is an era, kind of like in France at the time or something, there's a lot of student protests in Japan. Yeah. And I just love that everybody in the room is like, oh yeah, we've all fought the riot police. It's great. Yeah. I'm going to guess that's a Takahata joke, just knowing him. Mm-hmm. All right. Episode 20 is, I think, probably the worst. It's called Catch the Phony Lupin. And it's where you have this... we do get the amazing turn of phrase, the Dorobo Jima, the island of thieves, the island of burglars. That sounds like it could be a fun idea, but they don't do much with it. And basically it's this person is impersonating Lupin. Lupin wants to stop him, finds out they've got the Book of Thievery by Arsène Lupin I. But it doesn't have any of the side characters other than Zenigata. I think it's pretty slow. It feels like it was a good idea that didn't get much in the way of execution. Yeah,
it feels a bit aimless. Like it feels like an episode that could have been about 10 minutes long. And so you just kind of with it for a long time. There's some good stuff, you know. I think my favorite part is there's this incredibly silly sequence where when Zenigata shows up on the island, everybody's like, the cops are here. And then they jump up and they pull these, like, bell ropes, and their houses flip around because they have these incredibly like decadent houses with all the shit they've stolen in them, and it flips around and it's like a peasant's house in the fucking like 17th century Japan. It looks like, you know, Zatoishi's going to wander into the village and realize and find out they're being like oppressed by a Yakuza boss or something, and they're all like impoverished and dying. It's so, or it's like the village in like Yojimbo or something. It's just like incredibly desecrated. And that's just a very silly thing. But then the best part is later, Zenigata's in one of the houses, and Lupin comes in, and Lupin's like, hey, like, Pops, like, check this out. Basically, just, like, pulls the rope and flips the thing over while Zenigata is in there. It is not a great episode. It's got some fun moments, but that was my favorite part, is their insane flipping houses. The idea of all these old motherfuckers living on this island, and that's like their whole scam, basically.
It reminds me of a joke on The Simpsons decades later where it's the episode where Springfield tries prohibition, and Moe's Tavern, Moe has a thing that he pulls, and it turns Moe's Tavern into a pet shop when, like, the Finks come in. It's basically that same idea done, like, 20, 30 years earlier. All right, episode 21, Rescuing the Stubborn Tomboy, or Horse Girl, as we should accurately translate it, as you told us, Sean.
Yes.
This is an interesting one because this is the clearest by far prelude to Castle of Cagliostro, because Lupin's relationship with Rie, the girl here, is very similar to what we will get there. I will note that, like, this degree of gentleman thief Lupin is rarer. I think this is more like Castle of Cagliostro. Lupin, Miyazaki frames that one explicitly as it's an older Lupin who's kind of like calmed down a little bit, and I think it makes a little more sense in that context, but I still like it here, and I like seeing the kind of romantic side of Lupin where he's specifically helping this guy Ken Makoto, who was the partner of Lupin II, and he's, you know, trying to do right by that guy, and I think that is a fun other side of Lupin to see. You get an entire big train chase here that has to have been inspired by Buster Keaton's The General. It's really good. You get one of the funniest images in this whole show, which is Zenigata and all of his cops huddled on a little tiny rail cart together. So there's a lot of good stuff here, even if, like, this is, even for, I think, this side of Lupin, it's the most, like, gentleman thief version we get in this show.
Yeah, where he's like just a good guy. Like, he's just a hero, basically. He's just helping her.
He is a nice man in this one.
Yes, he is very much a nice man, and he doesn't particularly use Walther all that much, actually.
But he does use a giant tree arrow to impale a helicopter.
Yes, this is the episode where he took all those skills from the Poon episode. It's like, well, check this shit out. I've gotten pretty good at making makeshift crossbows. Like, I had to rewind and watch that section about 3 or 4 times because, like, the first time it happened, I couldn't understand what just happened, because it was like, okay, like, there's a tree thing and there's, like, it's kind of bent, this, like, branches bent under the tree. It's like, okay, and then let's go, and then the entire tree uproots, shoots to the sky, and hits a helicopter. Like, wait, and then I rolled it back. I was like, okay, I guess. Just like, do they not know how deep tree roots go and how hard it is to uproot an entire fucking tree? Like, I'm pretty sure it takes a little bit more than bending one branch down there, and the whole thing's just gonna shoot into the fucking sky like fucking 100 feet and impale a helicopter hovering there. It's pretty hilarious.
I mean, this one, you also have the train. It gets, like, blown off the tracks and goes through the forest and then lands on another set of tracks, and Zenigata's like, God damn it, that Lupin. But this one's fun because you have Zenigata and the gangsters and Lupin all kind of in a chase together. Jigen is around the edges. It's fun. I will say this one, I think, is in the same vein as Castle of Cagliostro, where it is a little more of a, like, Hayao Miyazaki story than it is a Lupin III story, but I like it. I like it a lot. I like the whole dynamic where the girl doesn't know her dad was a thief and is, like, really resistant to that and kind of learns over the course of the episode. It's sweet. It's well done. It's a little different than the surrounding episodes, but I like it.
Yeah, it's fun. I like the train sequence. I think is very strong. I do really like when the train goes off the rails and is going down into the forest, and Zenigata looks at it as like, Lupin, you idiot! Like, there's no rails in the fucking forest. And that's when then later it lands on the rails at the very bottom somehow. It's not my favorite episode, but it's a good one.
Episode 22, the first move computer operation, where the police department has gotten a high-tech computer that can eliminate crime. It's like a precog thing from Minority Report, but instead of 3 people in a pool, it is an old-fashioned ticker tape computer.
Yes.
Which I do. I like the premise of this one a lot. I think it runs out of steam by the end, and I wish. And I say I wish. There are later Lupin episodes in other shows that just do this premise and probably do it better, because I think it is a good, fun idea. I think it's not it's not a bad episode. This one's fine, but I don't think it's really particularly well executed.
Yeah, it's just another one of those that kind of it runs out of steam. And it's just it's like, okay, you did your premise and they just keep going. And it's, in the twist at the end is that Lupin has his plan that he's executing that the computer has predicted. And then he's just like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to change what I'm going to do. And the one thing a computer can never predict is the whims of a person. It's like, okay, that's fine. It's like, it's not the most exciting. Like, I don't, it makes sense, but it's not a particularly exciting resolution to the story. I think it would have been better to like have him, instead of it being about like because they describe it as like the human frailties of a whimsy, and it's like, and of just sort of you just like deciding to do something on a whim, rather than the way you beat the computer isn't by beating the computer, it's by beating the people operating the computer. Like, that to me feels like something that they're heading in that direction, which is a much more sort of mindable plot for drama, and they don't actually do anything with it. So I think that's the problem with that episode.
But episode 23 is perfect. The big golden showdown. What an amazing finale. It is just a party. Everybody's here. Basically, I guess 10 billion yen in golden coins was just discovered by some miners, which feels like I want to know the backstory of that, but it is fun. And then it is Lupin's like, I'm going to take these coins, and it is just a crazy, zany adventure. You can feel every member of the production getting to do their thing. You have Miyazaki's planes, you have Otsuka's guns and cars, everyone is doing their thing, and it ends with this amazing exchange between Zenigata and the gang, and everyone swimming away to Asia, or to China. I love this episode.
So they're swimming away to America, but then they're like, oh, we should go to China, but they're still supposed to be swimming towards America, even though they're swimming towards China, if you know anything about the direction the sun sets in.
Yes, that's why I simplified it, but yes.
This is a very good episode. It's very much like the finale, right? It is not particularly about what is the plot of the caper is kind of whatever. It's more just, let's show off with our animation is kind of what this episode felt like to me, which is fine. If you want for your finale, like, let's just have the most kind of like madcap just running around, getting, throwing every idea you want out there, and just doing it with like the utmost level of skill in terms of animation. And then it does have some good stuff at the end we talked about with like Zenigata, and then him seeing Lupin seemingly blow up and crying, and then jumping into the water after he realizes what's happened. There is a weirdly Indiana Jones 4-esque moment where how Lupin and friends survive is they get into some barrels, and so they were in there when it blew up, and all the barrels are just launched into the ocean and they're fine. And I saw that, I'm like, oh man, there's a bunch of like pedants who hate Indiana Jones 4 that don't want to watch this episode because it's not as ridiculous as a nuke, but it's fundamentally the same idea, and it would also 100% kill you if you tried to do it.
It's okay. It's a cartoon. Yes. It's fun.
Yes, it's fun.
And,
yeah.
Yeah, and ending with them all swimming away as Zenigata is chasing them, like, every Lupin show has to end that way, right? Like, that is, this is fundamentally, I don't know how the final episodes of part 2 and 3 and so on, but it should always end with everybody on the run from Zenigata like this, because this is the way it always has to end, right?
Yes, or if it was still Osumi, so they would all have gotten killed or something, it would just be incredibly dark. That would be the other way it would end for me.
Okay, and then there would not be 60 years of Lupin television.
No. But it would be,
all right.
You would be haunted for the rest of your life, though.
Oh, man. Sean, this is honestly one of my favorite anime ever. I love this show.
Yeah, it's fucking amazing. Like, it's like a miracle show when you watch it, because it's, when you know some of that production history stuff, the show shouldn't have been good. Like, it had kind of like no right, at least as like the entire thing, to be good. Because this is the kind of shit that has sunk shows so bad. Like, the thing it made me think of was Gundam Wing, which very famously, had the director replaced a little bit before the halfway point. And that show, not to say that like the early parts of Gundam Wing are incredible, but they're pretty good. And that show did not recover and just sank really hard. And like Lupin the Third, it does this like kind of like miraculous metamorphosis where, as we talked about at the beginning, like, it has these two different styles and halves and this kind of middle transition period, but both of those styles are so good that I think people are going to have a preference one way or the other. Like, I like the Osumi stuff more. It feels to me, Jonathan, like you're probably more on, like, you like the Miyazaki kind of heist stuff more. But
Me?
it is...
No, that doesn't sound like me.
Yes. But, like, whichever one is your preference, the other side of it is so good, you're like, you're going to enjoy it anyways, right? And you're going to respect it, because it's executed at such a high level. And it's that kind of thing where it's like, if you talk about what is your favorite or the best episode, like, I think it's like, it's got to be either episode 4 or 9 for Osumi, and then it's episode 14, the boat episode, for the Miyazaki side, and they're like equally good. Like, it's not one is qualitatively better than the other. It's like, I just have a personal preference for one style or the other, but they're both executed at such a high level of mastery, that it's amazing. It's like you're just getting 2 incredible shows in one package in this insane way.
Absolutely. And I think, it is also illustrating a tension that is going to be there in Lupin the Third up until today, is kind of that, like, hey, we can do kind of anything with this. It can clearly sustain a lot of different tones and kind of like ways to tell a story. And that is part of the fun that means Lupin can survive as long as he has. And we've got a lot more to watch. So next week on Japanimation Station Season 3, we will be watching, just broadly, I will say, the next 3 episodes of this season. We are in the zone of Part 2 because that lasted 77 to 1980 and had 2 movies. We will be starting out with the first Lupin the Third movie, known in English as The Mystery of Mamo. It was released a year into Part 2's run, but it is pretty different, and it uses a lot of the people who made Part 1 worked on that one. And so we are going to start there, and the episode after that, we will do a bunch of Part 2 episodes, and then we'll finish up the Part 2 journeys with Cagliostro and Miyazaki's episodes from Part 2. But for next week, you want to watch The Mystery of Mamo. It is a wacky movie, and it is a good time, and I'm excited to talk about it here on the show.
I'm very excited to get deeper into this stuff, because as I said, I have not seen anything else Lupin related. I'm very excited to see where this goes, because I want to see more of the adventures of this Lupin guy, because you know what, Jonathan? He's pretty groovy.